They say there are two kinds of men who come home from war: the ones who come back breathing and the ones who actually come back. Mason Cole was the first kind. 14 years he left pieces of himself in places the map never bothered to name. Now he stands in front of his dead father's house, shingles curling off the roof like burned paper, weeds swallowing the porch railing whole, paint peeling in long strips like the skin of something that gave up. And the only sound is his 8-year-old daughter breathing beside him, her small fingers wrapped around two of his. He doesn't feel like a father. He doesn't feel like a soldier. He doesn't feel like much of anything. If you've ever come home to find that home no longer exists, stay with me. This story is for you. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. Hit like if you believe that broken things are still worth fixing. The moving truck left without ceremony. That was the part Mason hadn't expected. How fast the driver pulled away. No wave, no nod, just the grinding of gears and the smell of diesel hanging in the September air like something rotten. The truck turned the corner at the end of Birchwood Lane and disappeared. And just like that, Mason Cole was standing alone on the cracked front walk of 14 Birchwood Lane, Willow Ridge, Tennessee, with a duffel bag at his feet, a little girl at his side, and absolutely no idea what he was supposed to do next. Lily hadn't said anything since they crossed the town line. She was like that sometimes. Went quiet when she was processing something too big for words. She got it from him. He wasn't sure if that was a compliment to himself or an indictment. "Is this it?" she asked finally. Mason looked at the house, gutters sagging on one end, a front step that had cracked clean through the middle. The big oak in the yard had dropped half its branches over the summer, and nobody had cleared them. The window on the upper left, his old bedroom window, had a crack running diagonally across the glass, sealed with duct tape that had mostly given up. "Yeah," he said, "this is it." Lily was quiet for another 3 seconds. Then, "It looks sad." He didn't argue with her. She was 8, not stupid. "It needs work," he said. "Are we going to fix it?" "We're going to try." She considered that, nodded once the way she did when she decided to accept an answer she wasn't fully satisfied with. Then she picked up her backpack, purple, covered in iron-on patches of planets, and a very determined-looking astronaut, and walked toward the front door like she'd already made her peace with it. Mason stood there a moment longer. He looked down the street. Willow Ridge hadn't changed much. The Hendersons' place still had the American flag on the porch. The old Cartwright lot at the end of the block was still empty and overgrown. The sidewalk still had those same uneven slabs of concrete that heaved up every winter and settled crooked every spring. He used to ride his bike over those slabs as a kid and count the bumps. He couldn't remember the last time he'd thought about that. He couldn't remember the last time he'd thought about anything from before. His father had died 11 months ago. Heart attack, quick, in the kitchen at 7 in the morning. The neighbor found him. Mason had been at a forward operating base in a country he isn't allowed to name in civilian company. He found out via a satellite phone call from his Aunt Carol that lasted 4 minutes, and then he had to go back to work because there was no other option. He hadn't cried then. He wasn't sure he'd cried since. That worried him sometimes, the dryness of it, but mostly he didn't think about it long enough for it to worry him properly. He'd taken his discharge 3 months later. Not because of his father's death, not exactly. The math had just finally come out wrong. 14 years of service. One daughter who barely knew his voice. A list of friends whose names he could only stand to think about for about 15 seconds before he had to find something else to do with his hands. The Army had given him a lot of things. A spine, a structure, a reason to get out of bed when getting out of bed felt impossible. But it had also taken a lot in return, and somewhere around March, Mason had looked at the accounting and decided the ledger didn't balance anymore. So here he was. Willow Ridge, Birchwood Lane, his father's house. Home, supposedly.
Tipo si somewhat.
Getting the key from the lockbox was easy enough. His Aunt Carol had handled the estate. She'd driven down from Nashville 4 times in the past year to keep the utilities on and make sure the pipes didn't burst over winter. She'd offered to be here today. Mason had told her not to worry about it. He'd regretted that by the time they hit the Kentucky border, but he wasn't going to call her back and admit it. The lock was stiff. He had to jiggle it twice,
then lift the door handle slightly while turning, the old trick his father had showed him when he was maybe Lily's age, and the door gave with a long groan that sounded more biological than mechanical. Inside smelled like old wood and something faintly floral. His Aunt Carol had put a plug-in air freshener in the hallway. It was working hard against the competition and losing. Lily walked in ahead of him, her sneakers squeaking on the hardwood. She turned a slow circle in the entryway, looking up at the ceiling, at the staircase, at the coat hooks by the door, where 3 of his father's old jackets still hung. "Whose are those?" she asked, pointing at the jackets. "Grandpa's." Lily looked at them. She'd met his father twice. She was 3 the second time, and she didn't remember either visit. Mason had a photograph somewhere, his dad holding Lily on the front porch in summer, both of them squinting against the sun, his dad's huge hand nearly swallowing her little shoulder. He hadn't looked at that photograph in 2 years. "Should we keep them?" Lily asked. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "I think we should," she said. "It would be weird if there were empty hooks." He set his duffel bag down at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't disagree.
The next 2 hours were slow and practical. Mason moved boxes in from the small trailer he'd hitched to his truck. Not much, because he'd learned a long time ago not to accumulate things that could get left behind or blown up, or simply lost in the moving every 18 months chaos of military life. He had Lily's bed frame, her mattress, her box of books, her art supplies. He had his own bed, a full, nothing fancy. He had a kitchen table his Aunt Carol had left, 4 chairs, a couch that had come from a furniture outlet in Clarksville. Practical things. Durable things. Lily made her room her project. She was meticulous about it in a way that impressed him, and occasionally unnerved him. She lined her books by size first, then rearranged them by color, then settled on a compromise system she explained to him in full detail while he was trying to figure out which box held the shower curtain. He listened with half his attention and all of his love, which was the ratio he was working with most days. By 6 o'clock, the beds were set up, the kitchen had the basic necessities, and Mason was standing at the back door of the house with a cup of coffee. He'd bought the instant kind. The real coffee maker was somewhere, looking at the backyard. It was worse back here. Overgrown, like the front, but also littered with the remnants of his father's projects that had never quite reached completion. There was the half-built garden shed from maybe 2015 that had made it as far as the frame and then stalled. There was a rusted grill, lid missing. There was a bird feeder on a wooden post, tilted at about 20 degrees, completely empty. His father had loved feeding the birds. Mason remembered that suddenly and sharply, the way memories sometimes arrived. Not gently, but like something thrown. He drank his coffee. It was bad. He drank it anyway. His phone buzzed. A text from his buddy, Reeves. Staff Sergeant Danny Reeves, now living in Chattanooga with a wife and twin boys. "You make it?" Mason typed back. "Yeah, house is a disaster." Reeves. "Expected. You eating?" Mason. "I have instant coffee and half a box of Cheez-Its." Reeves. "That's not eating." Mason. "It's close enough." Reeves. "How's Lily holding up?" Mason looked through the kitchen window. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor. She'd abandoned the chair the moment he turned his back, eating a peanut butter sandwich he'd made her and reading one of her books with the focused intensity of a scholar. Her brown hair was falling out of the braid she'd done herself that morning. She'd gotten a smear of peanut butter on her chin and hadn't noticed. Mason. "Better than me." Reeves. "Always does. Call me if you need anything, man." He put the phone in his pocket. He didn't call people when he needed things. That was also something he'd gotten from his father, probably, and he was becoming increasingly uncertain whether it was a strength or a flaw. The first night was hard in the way that first nights in new places always were, even if the new place was technically an old place. The house had its own sounds, settling, creaking, the rattle of a window he hadn't identified yet. Mason lay on his bed in the dark for a long time, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like the continent of Africa. He ran through the list of things that needed to be fixed. It was a long list. It kept growing while he was making it, the way those lists do. Roof needed inspection. Front porch step was a liability. The gutters needed to be re-secured on the north side. The crack in his old bedroom window. The downstairs bathroom had a faucet that dripped. He'd noticed it almost immediately, the sound following him around the house like an accusation. The backyard was a season's worth of work on its own. The garden shed frame would have to come down. It had been out in the weather too long to be salvaged. And those were just the physical things. He was still awake at midnight when he heard Lily's feet on the hardwood in the hallway. The door to his room was open. She appeared in the doorway, small and rumpled, her owl print pajamas twisted sideways from sleeping. "I can't sleep," she said. "Me neither." She crossed the room without asking permission and climbed onto the bed beside him, pulling a portion of the blanket over herself with practiced efficiency. "New houses are loud," she said. "Old house," he corrected. "New to us." "Same thing." He didn't argue. She was right again. After a minute, she said, "Dad?" "Yeah." "Are we going to be okay here?" He thought about it. He could have said yes, absolutely, of course, the automatic parental reflex. He almost did. But Lily had a way of knowing when he was operating on autopilot, and she didn't appreciate it. "I think so," he said. "I think it's going to take some work. But, yeah, I think we're going to be okay." She was quiet for a moment, processing. "Okay," she said. And then, "Your coffee smells really bad, by the way. Like burnt plastic. It's instant. Can we get a real coffee maker? It's on the list." "Put it near the top." He almost smiled at the ceiling. Almost. She was asleep in 11 minutes. He lay there listening to her breathe and thought about his father feeding the birds in the backyard, and thought about the water stain on the ceiling, and thought about nothing in particular and everything at once, the way you do when your life has just lurched into a new shape and your mind hasn't caught up yet. He eventually slept. It wasn't good sleep. It would do. Well, the next morning was a Tuesday, overcast, with that particular early September coolness that Willow Ridge always got before the rest of the state figured out summer was over. Mason was up at 5:15 out of pure habit. The Army didn't leave him alone even when it wasn't his boss anymore, and had already walked the perimeter of the exterior by the time Lily came downstairs at 7:30, asking about breakfast. "We have eggs," he said. "What else?" "Bread, peanut butter, those Cheez-Its." Lily gave him a look that was older than 8 years. "We need to go to the grocery store." "I know. Today." "I know, Lily. Like soon. I heard you the first time." She sat down at the kitchen table and watched him scramble the eggs. She had her notebook out, a composition book with a green cover. And she was drawing something while she waited. She drew constantly. Spaceships mostly, but also maps of places that didn't exist. Elaborate floor plans of houses she designed in her head, portraits of people she made up. He didn't know where that came from. Not from him. Her mother, maybe. That was a thought he kept short. Lily's mother, Diane, had left when Lily was 14 months old. Not dramatically. No screaming, no thrown dishes, no villain moment. She'd just woken up one morning and realized she wasn't built for the life she'd chosen, and she'd been honest about it in a way Mason still couldn't decide to respect or resent. She'd left a note that was 3 paragraphs long and surprisingly articulate. She sent cards on Lily's birthday, sometimes remembered Christmas. She lived in Portland now, he thought. He hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. Lily asked about her occasionally, and Mason answered as honestly as he could, which mostly meant, "She's a person who made a choice. That choice wasn't about you. You are worth choosing." He wasn't sure Lily fully believed the last part. He kept saying it anyway. He put the eggs in front of her. She looked at them critically. "No cheese?" "It's on the grocery list." "Move it up." Ipad. They went to Millbrook's, the grocery store that had been on Main Street since before Mason was born. It had been updated at some point since his childhood, self-checkout added. The produce section expanded, the lighting changed to something more modern, but the bones were the same. The same narrow aisles, the same slightly crooked end cap displays, the same bell above the door. Lily pushed the cart. She did this with absolute authority, navigating the aisles with focus, and occasionally disappearing around a corner before he could tell her not to. He found her in the cereal aisle standing in front of the options with her arms crossed, performing some kind of internal analysis. "The astronaut one," she said, pointing. "That's 80% marshmallow." "That's not true." "It's close." "I'll eat the other 20% very responsibly." He put the astronaut cereal in the cart. She gave a small nod of satisfaction. They moved through the store methodically. He was adding a bag of coffee, real ground coffee, because she'd made her position clear, when he heard the small collision, cart versus cart, somewhere behind him, the metallic clatter of contact followed by a general commotion of apology. He turned. A woman was crouching down to pick up a can of crushed tomatoes that had rolled under the shelving. She was maybe 30, dark hair pulled back with strands escaping on both sides, wearing a flannel shirt over a plain t-shirt and jeans with actual dirt on one knee. Not decorative, actual mud. She had another can in her hand and was wedging herself halfway under the shelf to reach the one that had rolled. The older woman with the other cart was apologizing profusely. The crouching woman was waving it off. "Completely my fault. I came around the corner too fast," the crouching woman was saying, her voice clear and unhurried. "Don't worry about it. I've got it." She retrieved the second can, stood, checked both cans for dents with a quick, efficient inspection, and added them to her basket. She had a basket, not a cart, not much in it. A loaf of bread, some produce, the two cans, what looked like a block of cheese. She caught Mason looking. He hadn't meant to stare, and offered a quick, neutral smile. "Traffic hazard," she said, gesturing at the narrow aisle. "Yeah," he said. And that was it. She turned and moved to the next aisle. Lily appeared at his elbow. "Who was that?" "I don't know." She had mud on her pants. "I noticed." "Working people have mud on their pants," Lily said, with the absolute conviction of someone who had recently read this somewhere and decided it was a fact. She added it to her notebook sometimes. Things she'd decided were true. He'd read a few of them once, when she'd left it on the kitchen table. Real explorers don't make excuses. You should always be able to describe what you're looking at. Working people have mud on their pants. He didn't know where any of them came from, but he thought most of them were better than advice he'd received from actual adults. They checked out and drove home. He spent the afternoon on the front porch step. Specifically, he spent it taking apart the cracked step and figuring out what he needed to replace it. The concrete had failed at a seam, old work, probably original to the house, and the rebar underneath had rusted through. It was more involved than a simple patch. He'd need to pull the whole section, reform it, pour new concrete if he did it properly, or use poured concrete pavers if he wanted the faster solution. He was sitting on the walk with the pieces of the old step around him, making notes on a folded piece of paper, when he became aware that someone was watching him. He looked up. Across the street, maybe 40 feet away, the woman from the grocery store was standing at the edge of her driveway, watching him with casual, undisguised interest. She had a paper cup of coffee in one hand. The flannel shirt was still on. He straightened. She lifted her coffee cup slightly, not quite a wave, more of an acknowledgement, and called across, "Rebar?" He blinked. "What?" "The rebar. Is it rusted through or just surface rust?" She wasn't shouting exactly, but she had a caring voice, clear and direct. He looked at the pieces around him. "Through," he said. She nodded, like he'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Whole section needs to come out then. You can't patch over failed rebar. It'll just crack again in 2 winters. Mason looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. "Just saying." She sipped her coffee without any apology for the observation. He sat back on his heels. "You live there?" he asked. The house across the street was in good condition, freshly painted within the last couple of years, landscaping that was simple but maintained, windows clean. 6 years, she said. "Your dad was a good neighbor." That landed quietly. He looked at the concrete pieces around him. "You knew him?" "Not well. He used to bring extra tomatoes from the garden in August. Always knocked first, never assumed you were home." She paused. "I'm sorry about what happened. I saw your aunt here a few times this year, but I didn't have her number." "It's fine," he said reflexively. She didn't say it's not fine or press it, she just nodded. He appreciated that more than he expected to. "I'm Victoria," she said. Victoria Sinclair. Mason Cole. I figured. He talked about you. He didn't know what to do with that, so he didn't do anything with it. He looked back at the broken step. I need to get a concrete form, he said, mostly to himself. Birchwood Hardware on Oak Street has them, Victoria said. They close at 6. Ed knows what he's doing. Tell him what you're dealing with, and he'll set you up. Thanks. She nodded once, started to turn back toward her house. Hey, Mason said. She looked back. The tomatoes from his garden. He brought you tomatoes? Every August, she said. Big ones, heirlooms. He grew them from seed, I think. Mason looked at the overgrown backyard. There was a raised bed along the south fence he'd noticed that morning. Weathered wood, the soil dry and choked with weeds. He hadn't thought much about what it had been. He thought about it now. Okay, he said. Thanks. Victoria Sinclair went back across the street. He watched her go for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, then looked back at the ruined step. He made a note on his folded paper. Tomato seeds. For next year, maybe. Birchwood Hardware was exactly as described. Ed was a compact 70-something man with reading glasses on a chain and the manner of someone who had spent 40 years explaining things to people who didn't listen well enough and had made his peace with it. He listened to Mason's description of the step situation, asked 3 precise questions, and assembled everything needed in under 10 minutes. You do much concrete work? Ed asked while ringing him up. Some. Enough. Your dad used to come in here. Harold Cole. Good man. Sorry for your loss. Thank you, Mason said. He could never throw anything away, Ed said, not unkindly. Used to buy the smallest amount of something possible. Said he might find a use for what he had at home first. He smiled a little. Always came back for more eventually. Mason paid and carried the supplies to the truck. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, not quite ready to start the engine. His father, apparently, had been a man that people noticed, that people remembered. Mason hadn't known that with any completeness. You can't know it about your father when you've been gone 14 years, when your visits home were measured in days and were always half occupied by the awkward recalibration of being a son again after so much time being something else entirely. He'd known his father as a man of few words and consistent habits. He hadn't known him as a neighbor who brought tomatoes or a hardware store regular who couldn't throw things away. He wondered what else he didn't know. He started the truck and drove home. Lily had made friends. He discovered this upon returning to find her in the backyard, the disaster zone backyard, with a girl about her age he'd never seen before. Both of them crouched over something in the weeds near the fence. He stood at the back door and watched for a moment. It's a roly-poly, the other girl was saying. I know what a roly-poly is, Lily said, not unkindly. I want to know if it's okay. It's fine. They're always fine. It was on its back. They flipped themselves. Watch. Lily watched. Apparently the roly-poly was fine because both girls sat back satisfied. I'm Harper, the other girl said. Lily? You just moved in? Yesterday. My mom lives down the street, the blue house. I like blue houses, Lily said. They became friends with the simplicity that 8-year-olds manage. No groundwork, no posturing, just the immediate and practical recognition that here is another person my size who finds similar things interesting. Therefore, we are friends now. Mason watched this with something uncomfortable in his chest. Not bad uncomfortable. The other kind. He went inside and started dinner. Pasta. Simple. The box of noodles and a jar of sauce because he was realistic about his limitations on day 2. He was draining the pasta when he heard Lily come in the back door. Dad, Harper's mom wants to know if you want to come to dinner. He turned. Lily was standing in the kitchen doorway with the dirt of the backyard on her shoes, looking at him with a carefully neutral expression that he recognized as her diplomatic face. She'd learned it for situations where she wanted something but understood it wasn't entirely her decision. Not tonight, he said. Tell her thank you. Lily's face did the briefest flicker of something, disappointment maybe, and then reset. Okay, she said. You okay with pasta? I'm okay with pasta, she confirmed, and kicked off her shoes. After dinner, she told him about Harper in considerable detail, that Harper liked horses and science experiments, and was afraid of moths specifically, but not other bugs, that she had an older brother who was 12 and apparently very annoying, that she'd lived on Birchwood Lane her whole life and knew, like everyone on the street. She says the lady across the street is really nice, Lily added. Victoria Sinclair? She didn't say the name, she said the lady across the street with the dark hair. She said she helped her mom fix a sprinkler once. Okay. She said she's really smart. Seems like it, Mason said. Harper says she works on her laptop outside in the mornings, but she also does stuff with her hands, like building things. He glanced across the street through the window. Victoria Sinclair's house was lit from inside, warm yellow light through the windows. He could see the outline of someone moving through the front room. Eat your pasta, he said. Lily ate her pasta. Thursday brought rain and a plumbing surprise. He found it at 7 in the morning, a wet spot on the ceiling of the downstairs hallway, directly below the upstairs bathroom. He stood there for 60 full seconds, doing the arithmetic of how bad this was. Then he went upstairs and pulled the panel under the bathroom sink. The supply line to the cold water was weeping at a joint. Old compression fitting, probably original, finally giving up. It wasn't catastrophic yet. It would be, given time. He turned off the water supply to the bathroom at the valve behind the toilet and went down to his truck for his tools. He was back under the sink, flashlight in his teeth and wrench in hand, when he heard Lily's voice from the doorway. There's a lady at the front door. Which lady? The across-the-street lady. He extracted himself from under the sink, bumped his elbow on the pipe as he did, which hurt with a specificity that always amazed him, and went to the front door. Victoria Sinclair was standing on the porch with 2 cups of coffee from what looked like an actual coffee shop, a bag of something under her arm, and the same unhurried composure she'd had at the grocery store and in the driveway. I saw you were up early, she said. The light in the upstairs bathroom was on. Figured either something's broken or you're a morning person. Both, he said. Supply line under the sink. She didn't wince or make the sympathetic sound people who don't know about plumbing make. She just nodded. Compression fitting? He looked at her. Yeah. The houses on this block were all plumbed around the same time, she said. Same fittings, same vintage. I replaced mine 2 years ago before they failed. She held out one of the coffees. I figured you hadn't found a coffee maker yet. He took the coffee. It was from the bakery on Main, so he'd driven past it and noted it the way he noted most things, automatically, filed under resources. It was good coffee. He noticed that immediately. Thank you, he said. Do you have a 1/2-inch compression fitting? She asked. I've got the fitting. I'm good. Okay. She reached into the bag she was carrying. I also brought... Your daughter mentioned she likes drawing things. I had these in my workshop. She produced a set of mechanical pencils in a small case. Not cheap ones, not the kind you buy at a drugstore. They were a spare set. I don't need them. He stared at the pencils. She mentioned it when? He asked. She came over yesterday afternoon while you were doing the step form. Victoria said it with the complete calm of someone reporting a weather observation. She knocked on my door and asked if she could borrow a pencil. We talked for a while. She's very thorough in conversation. I didn't know she came over. She told me she was allowed to cross the street to neighbors, Victoria said. I didn't have reason to doubt her. Mason ran a hand over his face. He did not, in fact, have a rule about crossing the street to neighbors. He had a rule about not crossing streets without looking, which Lily had probably filed as the same thing. He was going to need to have a conversation about the difference between the letter and the spirit of a rule. Right, he said. Yeah. Thank you for the pencils. She's a good kid, Victoria said simply. The sketches she showed me were impressive. He looked at the coffee. He looked at the pencils. He looked at Victoria Sinclair, who was standing on his porch with an entirely uncomplicated expression, like there was nothing unusual about showing up on a stranger's doorstep with good coffee and mechanical pencils on a Thursday morning in the rain. Can I ask you something? He said. Go ahead. What do you do for work? Something moved behind her eyes. Brief, quickly contained. Not defensiveness exactly. More like the micro-expression of someone who gets this question a lot and has processed their feelings about it to a manageable dullness. Engineering and infrastructure, she said. Project development. I run a company. What kind of projects? Large scale. Bridges, roadways, structural systems. International mostly. She said it the way you'd say I work in sales or I do accounting, factual, no performance. He nodded slowly. And you live here? I live here, she agreed. He didn't ask the obvious follow-up. That felt like something you don't ask someone you've known for 3 days, even if the gap between International Infrastructure Company and house on Birchwood Lane was wide enough to drive one of her bridges through. She seemed to recognize his restraint and didn't rush to fill the space. I should let you get back to the plumbing, she said. Yeah. She turned to go. Victoria. She looked back. Thank you, he said. For the coffee, for the pencils, for telling me about Ed at the hardware store. She considered this for a moment. Your father was a decent neighbor, she said. I figure the least I can do is give you a running start. She went back across the street. He stood on the porch with his good coffee and the mechanical pencils and listened to the rain come down on the gutters he still hadn't fixed, one of which was making a sound like a slow leak into a bucket somewhere above him. He had a lot of work to do. He went back upstairs to fix the plumbing. By Sunday, the front step was re-poured and drying, the supply line was replaced, and Mason had identified 14 additional items on his repair list through the methodical process of simply walking through the house and looking at everything until it told him what was wrong with it. He was on the roof, or the lower edge of it, on a ladder, checking the flashing around the chimney, when Lily called up to him from the yard below. Victoria wants to know if she can help with anything. He looked down. Lily was standing at the base of the ladder in her astronaut patch jacket, and across the yard at the gate to the side fence, Victoria Sinclair was standing with her arms crossed and her expression carrying the specific patient quality of someone who has asked a question through an intermediary and is waiting to see how it lands. He looked at the flashing, looked at his list, which he'd brought up with him out of habit, looked at the section of gutter he'd been avoiding because it required someone holding the ladder while he repositioned it. Tell her I could use someone to hold a ladder, he said. Lily turned and relayed this information with great seriousness. Victoria Sinclair came through the gate. She was wearing work gloves already, leather-palmed, the real kind, and her hair was back in a knot that kept the wind out of it. She took the base of the ladder without ceremony and planted her feet and looked up at him. Ready, she said. He went back to work. 3 hours later, the gutter was re-secured, the flashing was resealed, and they had identified together. She had pointed out 2 things he'd missed, both correctly. That the north-facing shingles were going to need replacement before the next heavy rain. She knew her way around a roof inspection, the way people know their way around a topic they've studied for reasons that have nothing to do with impressing anyone. You do roofing? He asked, on the ground, both of them with the specific tiredness of outdoor work in your body. I've done a lot of things, she said. When I was first starting out, I worked field jobs on construction sites. You learn everything if you pay attention. When were you starting out? Right after college. I was 22. She pulled off her gloves and looked at them for a moment. I didn't have much when I started. The company grew fast. A lot happened quickly. But you're here, he said. Again. The same observation. This time she looked at him directly. I'm here, she confirmed. Willow Ridge is where I want to be. I can run the company from here. I've been doing it for 4 years. A pause. People have opinions about that. My board, my former colleagues, She stopped. People, she finished in a way that didn't close the door so much as hold it at a careful angle. He let that stand. Well, he said, the roof situation is better than it was. Agreed. She almost smiled. Not quite, but close. You've got a good list going. You want help working through it? I've got time on weekends. He looked at her. You sure? He said. It's not. I don't want to take up your... Mason. She said his name for the first time. It was direct
unornamented. I'm offering because I want to, not to be polite. I don't do things to be polite. He believed her. Okay, he said. Saturday, the back porch railing. It's rotted through in 2 sections, and it needs to come off before someone falls through it. I'll bring tools, she said. I have tools.
I'll bring better ones, she said. And she went home across the street. Mason stood in the yard in the long evening light with sawdust on his sleeve and the smell of roofing sealant in his nose, and he thought, okay, just that. Okay. Like his mind testing the temperature of something new, seeing whether it was safe to put weight on. The oak tree cast long shadows across the yard. The bird feeder tilted its 20 degrees, as empty as the day he'd arrived. He reached out and straightened it, which didn't fix the lean because the post had shifted in the ground, but he held it straight for a moment. He thought about tomato seeds. He thought about next year. He went inside to make dinner. The back porch railing came off in pieces. That was the only way to describe it. Not deconstruction, not careful removal, but the progressive revelation of how badly something had been neglected when nobody was watching. Mason pulled the first section on Saturday morning, and the wood came apart in his hands in a way that was almost offensive, soft and punky in the middle, the fasteners having lost their grip on material that no longer had the density to hold them. He stood there with a fistful of rotten wood and looked at the rest of the railing running the length of the back porch, and understood that this was going to be a longer day than he'd planned. Victoria arrived at 8:15 with a canvas tool bag that was heavier than it looked, and a thermos of coffee she set on the porch rail, the one section still standing, at the far end, which would not survive the morning, without comment. She looked at what he'd already pulled off. She looked at the exposed post bases, which were dark with moisture damage all the way to the concrete footings. "The footings okay?" she asked. "I think so. The rot stopped at grade." "Good. Means we're replacing wood, not starting over." She pulled on her gloves and got to work on the next section without waiting for direction. That was something he'd already noticed about her. She didn't wait to be told what was obvious. She assessed and moved. It was efficient, and he was learning also somewhat rare. They worked the railing off in sections over the next 2 hours. The morning was cool and gray with the kind of overcast that couldn't decide whether to commit to rain or just threaten it all day. Lily came out at 9 with her composition book and installed herself in the old lawn chair at the edge of the yard, drawing something and periodically offering observations. "That piece is really bad," she said, when Mason pulled a section that essentially disintegrated. "Thanks, Lily. I'm just noting it." "I see it." "Victoria, did you see that piece?" Victoria, pulling a corroded lag bolt with a square drive she'd brought in her own bag because Mason's didn't have the right size, looked up. "I saw it." "It was bad," Lily said. "It was," Victoria agreed. Lily returned to her drawing, satisfied that the severity of the situation had been properly acknowledged. Around 10:30, Mason was on his knees measuring the post spacing, and Victoria was doing a quick inventory of what lumber they'd need when Lily appeared at the porch steps. "Can I ask you something?" she said to Victoria. Victoria looked up from her notepad. "Sure." "What's the hardest thing you ever built?" Mason watched Victoria's face from across the porch. She didn't deflect or give the easy answer. She thought about it. "A bridge," she said. "In a place where the weather was bad and the ground conditions were wrong and 3 different things went sideways at the same time." She paused. "We almost scrapped it twice." "We didn't." "Why not?" "Because the people on the other side of that river needed it," Victoria said simply. "Quitting is easier than you think it's going to be. So is finishing, if you stay in it long enough." Lily wrote something in her composition book. "Noted," she said, and went back to her chair. Mason looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at her notepad. Neither of them said anything, but the air between them had shifted slightly, the way air does when something real happens inside of it. "She's going to be something," Victoria said, quiet enough that Lily wouldn't hear. "She already is," Mason said. He went back to measuring. The lumber run took them to Birchwood Hardware at noon, Mason driving, Victoria in the passenger seat with the measurements written on a folded piece of paper in handwriting that was smaller and more precise than he would have guessed. Ed was behind the counter and recognized Mason with a nod. He looked at Victoria, and the nod shifted into something warmer. "Victoria, Haven't seen you in a few weeks. Been busy, she said. We need cedar for a porch railing replacement. Full run. Ed pulled the measurements toward him and studied them. I've got the right stock. You want pre-primed or raw? Raw, Mason said. I'll prime it myself. Ed glanced at him with the faint approval of someone who prefers people who know what they're doing. Give me 10 minutes. While Ed went to pull the lumber, Mason stood at the counter and Victoria stood beside him, both of them not talking, in the particular comfortable silence of two people who have been working together all morning and have temporarily exhausted the need for words. The hardware store had that smell, wood dust and metal and machine oil, that Mason associated with his father, specifically with his father's workbench in the garage, and the association arrived without warning and sat in his chest for a moment before he could file it somewhere manageable. You okay? Victoria asked. He looked at her. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the pegboard display of drill bits behind the counter. But she'd asked. Yeah, he said. You went somewhere for a second. Smell of the place, he said. After a pause, my dad. She nodded. She didn't push it further and didn't offer condolences again, which he appreciated. Once was right. More than once started to feel like something you say when you don't know what else to say. He came here a lot? She asked. Apparently. Ed remembers him. He told me once he'd been coming here since he was my age, Victoria said. His father brought him. He said Ed's father ran it then. Mason looked at her. He told you that? Last summer. He used to come out front in the evenings sometimes. I'd be on my porch. We'd wave. Sometimes we'd talk. She paused. He talked about you, that you were overseas, that you were good at your job. He was proud of you in a way he didn't quite know how to say out loud. Mason looked at the drill bits. He spent about 5 seconds being very still. That sounds like him, he said. I know, she said. Ed came back with the lumber ticket and the conversation moved back into practical territory, which was where Mason felt most competent, and he was grateful for the redirect. The afternoon was better than the morning because building is more satisfying than demolition, even when demolition is necessary. They worked the new posts first, cut to length, and dropped into the existing footings with new hardware, Mason drilling the pilot holes and Victoria holding the post plumb while he set the fasteners. She called level by eye before he checked it with the actual level, and she was right both times, which he noted without comment, because commenting on it would have made it into a thing, and it didn't need to be a thing. Lily migrated from the lawn chair to the porch steps to a position approximately 3 feet from where they were working, where she could observe with maximum detail. She had stopped drawing and started just watching, which she did with an intensity that was occasionally disconcerting. You're both left-handed, she announced at one point. Mason looked at Victoria. They were both holding tools in their left hands. I'm ambidextrous, Victoria said. I defaulted to left when I was learning. What are you? This was directed at Lily. Right-handed, Lily said, but I can write with my left if I practice. I've been practicing. How's that going? It looks like a spider had a bad day, Lily said, but I'm improving. Victoria's mouth curved, a real smile, one side slightly higher than the other, unguarded. Mason had been cataloging her expressions without meaning to, the way you catalog useful information in the field. Not because it matters yet, just because you notice things and your mind files them. That smile was different from the polite ones. He noticed that. They finished the rail sections by 4 o'clock. Not completely. The top rail needed one more cut that they'd run out of daylight for properly. But the structure was solid, plumb, and wouldn't kill anyone who leaned on it. Mason stood at the bottom of the yard and looked at it the way you look at work when you step back to assess, and it looked like a porch railing that had been done right. Good, he said. Good, Victoria agreed. They cleaned up in the particular quiet of people who are tired from physical work and satisfied with the reason for it. Lily swept the scraps of cut wood into a pile with the push broom, which was slightly too tall for her but which she wielded with determination. Mason coiled the extension cord. Victoria broke down her tools and repacked her bag with the same precision she'd unpacked it. You want to stay for dinner? Mason asked. He heard himself say it before he'd fully decided to. It came out straightforward, no inflection, the way he said most things. He watched her process it. What are you making?
she asked. Honestly, I don't know yet. That's not a strong sales pitch. I have actual groceries now, he said. It'll be something real. She looked at the house, looked at Lily, who had paused sweeping and was watching this exchange with the focused attention of someone who had already decided what she wanted the answer to be and was maintaining careful neutrality so as not to jinx it. Sure, Victoria said. Lily resumed sweeping with perhaps slightly more energy than before. Dinner was pasta again, not because he lacked imagination, but because he'd bought good ingredients this time, Italian sausage and proper crushed tomatoes, and a handful of fresh basil from the pot Lily had insisted on buying at the grocery store, and which was living on the kitchen windowsill in a state of cautious optimism. He cooked, and they sat at the kitchen table, Victoria and Lily, an unlikely pair, and he could hear them talking while he worked at the stove. Lily was telling her about the roly-poly from the backyard, then about Harper and the sprinkler, then, with a pivot that only made sense inside Lily's mind, about a book she was reading about deep-sea creatures. The anglerfish, Lily was saying, has this light on its head to attract things in the dark. But it's also kind of sad because the light is produced by bacteria that live inside it, and the anglerfish and the bacteria are dependent on each other forever.
They can't survive without each other. That's not sad, Victoria said. That's called mutualism. I know what it's called, Lily said. I said it's kind of sad. There's a difference. What's sad about it? Because neither of them chose it. They just are that way, together. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's not sad, she said. Maybe that's just what survival looks like sometimes. Mason stood at the stove and stirred the sauce and listened to the two of them talking about anglerfish. And something in him felt less like a weight and more like something that had been clenched, slowly loosening. He didn't examine it. He let it be. The food was good. Not restaurant good, but real good. The kind of meal that tastes right because everything is fresh, and you made it yourself, and the people eating it are hungry from actual work. Victoria ate without the performance of someone who doesn't usually eat real food, which told him something. Lily ate with the focused efficiency she always had when she liked what was in front of her. This is the best thing I've eaten in weeks, Victoria said at one point. That's concerning, Mason said. Are you not eating? I eat. I just eat badly when I'm in a work period. Coffee and things that come from delivery. That's not eating, Mason said. It came out before he realized it was exactly what Reeves had said to him the first night. That's what people keep telling me, Victoria said. Your board members? She made a sound, not quite a laugh. My board members don't know or care what I eat. They care about margins and project timelines. She turned her fork in the bowl. People who know me personally, there are fewer of those. It was said without self-pity, which was what made it sit differently than it might have. Just a fact, stated with the same matter-of-factness she used for everything. Why? Lily asked. Mason looked at Lily. What? Lily said. It's a real question. It's a private question, Mason said. She can say so if she doesn't want to answer, Lily said reasonably. Victoria looked at Lily with the expression of someone recalibrating their estimate of who they were dealing with. I moved around a lot, she said. Willow Ridge is the longest I've been anywhere in years. And when you're building something, a company, a project, you spend a lot of time in your head. Other people feel like an interruption. We're not an interruption, Lily said. Victoria looked at her. No, she said. You're not. Mason drank his coffee and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would improve on that. October came in gradually, the way it does in Tennessee. Not a hard turn, but a softening of things. The light going amber earlier. The mornings carrying a chill that the afternoons still burned off. The porch railing was finished. The gutters were cleaned and re-secured. Mason had reglazed 3 windows on the ground floor, recaulked the exterior seams on the north wall, and begun the process of attacking the backyard in systematic sections because there was no other way to approach something that large without going crazy. Victoria came over on Saturdays, sometimes Sundays. It had stopped being a matter of asking and had become, without discussion, simply a thing that happened. She would appear at 8 or 8:30, always with coffee, always in work clothes, always with some particular tool or material that addressed something specific,
and they would work until the afternoon light made outdoor work not worth it, and then they would sit on the new porch railing or at the kitchen table and talk, or not talk depending on what the day required. Lily adapted to this arrangement with the undemonstrative approval of someone who had decided something was good and saw no need to make a production of it. She worked alongside them when the task was in her range, offered opinions when they were not, and had developed a habit of appearing with unsolicited snacks around 11 o'clock, peanut butter crackers, apple slices, once an entire package of the astronaut cereal, which she seemed to consider a gift suitable for all occasions. "Your kid brings snacks like she's running a job site," Victoria said one Saturday, mid-October, examining a peanut butter cracker with genuine appreciation. "She's decided it's her contribution," Mason said. "It's a good contribution." "Don't tell her that. She'll start charging for it." Lily, who was within hearing range and had been pretending not to listen, made a small considering sound. The work moved through October in layers. The backyard shed frame came down. 2 weekends, working carefully because rusted metal is unpredictable and nobody wanted a tetanus situation. Victoria handled the reciprocating saw with the ease of someone who'd used one in situations considerably more complicated than a residential outbuilding. They piled the old frame lumber and metal for a junk haul, and afterward the backyard looked larger and emptier and full of potential in the way that empty spaces do when they've been cleared of the wrong thing. The raised beds along the south fence were Mason's project. He rebuilt the frames with new cedar. He'd bought extra when they ordered the porch materials, and turned the soil inside them, which had compacted and soured over a year of neglect, and worked in compost from the bags he'd bought at the garden center on Oak Street. It was more physical than skilled labor, and it was the kind of work he could do by himself at 6 in the morning while Lily slept, and he did it over 3 weekends in the quiet of the early October mornings, with only the birds and the sound of the neighborhood starting its day. He had not bought tomato seeds yet. He didn't know why. He kept meaning to and then not doing it. One morning, Victoria appeared at the garden bed while he was working. He hadn't heard her cross the street. She had her coffee, and she stood at the fence gate looking at what he'd done. "Ready to plant," she said. "In the spring," he said. "What are you planting?" He looked at the bed. "Tomatoes," he said. "Heirlooms. From seed." She nodded. She didn't say anything about his father. She didn't need to. They both knew what it was, and it didn't need narrating. "You know how to start from seed?" she asked. "I'll figure it out. It's not complicated, but timing matters." She looked at the bed. "I can show you. I've done it." "When did you do gardening?" "I garden," she said, with a faint defensive edge that softened quickly. "I have a kitchen garden. I don't talk about it because people find it unexpected." "Why?" "Because I'm a billionaire, apparently," she said, dry, "and billionaires are not supposed to get dirt under their fingernails voluntarily." He looked at her hands. There was dirt under her fingernails right now, from crossing the yard. "Seems like you don't spend much time worrying about what billionaires are supposed to do," he said. She looked at him. That real smile again, brief and one-sided. "No," she said. "Not really." Something had shifted between October and November in a way that was difficult to name because naming it would have required both of them to look at it directly, and they were, by separate but remarkably similar temperament, people who looked at a thing from the peripheral vision first, until they'd decided whether they could handle the full frontal examination. They knew things about each other now, the kind of things you accumulate through proximity and shared work. Mason knew that Victoria got a specific look when a phone call came from a number she recognized as her board of directors. A fraction of tension in the jaw, quickly controlled. He knew she didn't like wasting materials, that she would find a use for a scrap piece of wood before she'd throw it away. He knew she drank her coffee without sugar, but would put cream in it if the coffee was bad, which she'd explained once as corrective action, not preference. He knew that she went for early morning runs along the river path east of town, and came back with her hair damp and her expression cleared of whatever she'd woken up with. Victoria knew that Mason did the perimeter walk every morning, checking the house exterior the way you check a perimeter when checking a perimeter has been survival habit for 14 years. She knew he cooked better than he thought he did, and was baffled when she told him so. She knew that when Lily said something that caught him off guard,
His left hand went to the back of his neck in a gesture he was completely unaware of. She knew he had trouble sleeping. She could see the upstairs light on at odd hours, something she only knew because her own sleeping was inconsistent, and she sat at the window sometimes with her laptop in the small hours. She had never mentioned this to him. She knew he missed his father in a way he hadn't finished processing, because every time they worked on something in the house that his father had built or chosen, Mason would go quiet in a particular way that was different from his regular quiet. Deeper, more still. She did not mention that either. People grieve on their own timeline and in their own way, and the kindest thing you can do is work beside them without making it a project. The first real conversation happened on a Friday evening in mid-November. Mason had been on the phone for most of the day with the Veterans Affairs Regional Office, trying to navigate the bureaucratic maze of a benefits application that had been submitted in September and had apparently entered the paper equivalent of purgatory. It was the fourth call. Each call resulted in a transfer. Each transfer resulted in a new person who was sympathetic and overloaded and could not actually do the thing that needed doing. He'd been at the kitchen table for 3 hours when the call finally dropped on a bad signal, and he sat there looking at his phone with an expression that Lily, who had walked in from school, recognized immediately. "Dad, I'm fine. You have the look." "What look?"
The "I'm not fine, but I'm going to say I'm fine" look, Lily said. She put her backpack down with the same deliberateness she brought to everything. "Harper's mom is having people over tonight. Harper asked if I could come." "Go ahead." She studied him. "Will you be okay?" "Lily, I'm fine." She picked up her backpack again. At the door, she turned. "Victoria's porch light is on," she said. He looked at her. "I'm just noting it," Lily said, and went out the front door. He sat at the table another few minutes. He wasn't fine, technically, but fine enough. The benefits thing was a paperwork problem, not a catastrophe. He dealt with actual catastrophes. He was perspective capable. The problem was that perspective didn't actually help when you were tired, and the system that was supposed to help you felt like it was specifically designed to exhaust your willingness to try. He got up. He put on his jacket. He walked across the street. Victoria answered the door after one knock, which meant she'd heard him cross the porch, which meant she noticed things the way he noticed things, and he filed that without comment. She had her laptop open on the coffee table, some kind of engineering schematic on the screen, the kind that meant nothing to him visually, but clearly meant everything to someone who knew what they were looking at. She was in what he was coming to recognize as her home working clothes. A worn flannel, clean jeans, no shoes, her hair down instead of up. "You look terrible," she said. "Via bureaucracy," he said. She stepped back from the door. He sat on her couch, which was firmer than his and better quality. She sat across from him in an armchair, pulling her feet under her, which was a habit he'd seen before and which was the most informal thing about her most days. "Benefits application?" she asked. "Fourth call, third transfer. System says it's processing. Nobody knows what that means." "Do you have a VSO working with you?" He looked at her. "A what?" "Veterans Service Officer. They're advocates. They know the system and they can push things through channels that regular applicants can't access." She reached for her phone. "There's one here in Willow Ridge. Her name is Sandra Kim. She's very effective." "How do you know a VSO?" Victoria looked at him for a moment. "Because 3 of my most senior project managers are veterans, and 2 of them had benefit issues when I hired them. I did the research then." He looked at the floor. He wasn't sure what he'd expected her to say. Not that. "I should have done that," he said. "You've been repairing a house while raising a child while processing a significant amount of change," she said, with no judgment in it. "There's only so much bandwidth." "Still." "Mason." She said his name the way she sometimes did. Direct, landing clean. "It's not a character flaw. It's an information problem. Here." She held her phone out with Sandra Kim's contact already pulled up. He took the phone. He wrote down the number on his hand because he didn't have paper, which she noticed and didn't comment on. "Can I ask you something?" he said, handing the phone back. "You don't usually ask permission," she said. "It's a personal question." Something changed slightly in her posture. Not closing off exactly, more like adjusting. "Ask it," she said. "Why do you do this?" He caught himself. "I don't mean..."
Not this specifically. I mean, you show up with coffee, with tools. You've given up multiple weekends to help fix my house. You have a company that you're running from your kitchen table. You don't need to spend your Saturdays pulling rotten fence posts." He paused. "So why?" She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that he had time to wonder if he'd gotten the calibration wrong, asked too much, pushed past whatever boundary they'd been maintaining. "When I moved to Willow Ridge," she said, "the company was doing well, better than I'd planned. And I was alone in it, in a way that the success didn't fix. It made it more pronounced, actually." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "Your father. When he brought those tomatoes that first August, he knocked on the door and he introduced himself, and he said he'd noticed I hadn't been around much, and he wanted to make sure I knew the neighborhood took care of itself, and then he gave me tomatoes and left. No agenda. He just knocked." She stopped. She looked at the coffee table. "I hadn't had that before," she said. "Someone who knocked just to knock." Mason sat with that. "He was like that," he said. "I know. I got 4 years of it." She looked up. "And then he was gone. And then you showed up in that truck with your kid, and you looked like someone standing in front of something they'd been avoiding for a long time." She paused. "I knocked." He looked at her. She held his gaze without performing anything. No calculated expression, no protective irony. Just what she meant, said straight. "Thank you," he said. "Don't make it into something bigger than it is," she said. "I don't think I could," he said. "I think it's already about as big as it gets." She looked away first, picked up her coffee. The engineering schematic glowed blue-white on the laptop screen between them. "How's Lily liking the school?" she asked. And they moved on, the way you move on when something important has been said, and you both know it, and neither of you needs to hold it up to the light any longer. He stayed for 2 hours. They talked about the backyard plan for spring, about the insulation situation in the upstairs hallway, which needed addressing before winter proper set in, about a project she was overseeing in Portugal, a highway interchange that had specific geological complications that she described with the kind of animated frustration that meant she loved the problem even while it was driving her crazy. He asked questions he wasn't sure were intelligent enough, and she answered them like they were, which was a thing she did consistently. When he left, walking back across the street under a November sky that had gone fully dark and cold, he realized that he hadn't thought about the VA benefits situation in 2 hours. He realized that was the longest he'd gone without a background-level worry about something in several months. He didn't know what to do with that. He went inside. He heated up leftover pasta. He sat at the kitchen table where he'd had the worst of the afternoon's frustrations, and he ate and looked out the window at Birchwood Lane and thought that sometimes the thing you need is not a solution, but just the company of someone who is not trying to fix you. Saturday morning, Victoria showed up with a flat of insulation from the building supply on Route 9, and they spent the morning in the upstairs hallway working it into the ceiling cavity that Mason had opened up at the peak. Cramped work in a low-clearance space that required patience and careful movement. It was not the most comfortable morning either of them had had. Victoria got insulation fibers on her arm and spent 10 minutes being stoic about the itch, which he appreciated and did not draw attention to. By noon, they had it done. They sat on the hallway floor, it was too cramped to stand, and drank water and looked at the ceiling they'd just improved. "Warmer by next week," Victoria said. "Probably. The hallway always leaked heat on the northeast corner. Your father mentioned it once, said he'd been meaning to get to it." "There's a lot he was meaning to get to," Mason said. "There's a lot he did get to," Victoria said. "This house is structurally solid. The bones are good. Everything we're fixing is surface or deferred maintenance. Nothing's failing at the core." He looked at the ceiling. He thought she might not be talking only about the house. He wasn't sure. He let it stand. They were cleaning up in the hallway when Lily appeared at the top of the stairs with her composition book. She looked at them on the floor with the expression of a scientist observing an interesting result. "Harper's brother says you can tell a house is good if the floors don't squeak," she announced. Mason stood up. He took a step. The hallway floor squeaked. "Harper's brother is 12 and wrong," he said. "I'll tell him," Lily said, and went back to her room. Victoria was laughing. Not loudly. She wasn't a loud laugher, he'd noticed, but genuinely, the kind that catches you because it's not performed. She had her hand over her mouth, which was a thing she did when something surprised the laugh out of her. He looked at her laughing in the hallway outside his daughter's room and thought, okay, the same word as before. Just okay. Testing the temperature of something that was warmer now than it had been. November wore on. The insulation held. The house was warmer, or felt warmer, which might have been the same thing or might have been something else entirely. Mason called Sandra Kim at the Veterans Service Office on a Monday and had more progress in one 30-minute conversation than he'd had in 4 phone calls to the regional office. Sandra Kim was, as Victoria had promised, very effective. She was also brisk to the point of mildness and clearly had no patience for the parts of the bureaucracy that generated delay for no productive reason, which meant she and Mason got along efficiently and well. He texted Victoria after the call. Sandra Kim fixed in 30 minutes what I couldn't in 2 months. Victoria, 3 seconds later, told you. Mason, you were right. Victoria, I know, I usually am. He looked at the text. He thought about her saying that in person, the deadpan, the slight lift at the corner of her mouth. He thought about laughing in a hallway. He put his phone in his pocket and went outside to start working on the garden beds for winter covering, because the forecast said frost in 2 weeks, and he was finally starting to feel like someone who was thinking about next year. That was new. That was something. The bird feeder got a new bag of seed on a Wednesday evening, just before dark. Mason standing on the cold grass with the seed in a paper bag he'd bought at the pet store, filling the feeder until it was full, straightening the post in the ground with a rubber mallet and a piece of pressure-treated shim he'd cut in the garage. The post wasn't perfectly vertical. He got it close. He stepped back and looked at it. 3 days later, the first birds found it. He was in the kitchen at 6 in the morning when he saw them from the window. 3 house sparrows, then a cardinal, red against the November gray of the yard. He stood at the window with his good coffee and watched them. And he didn't think about anything in particular, which was itself a kind of new thing, and he let it happen. Across the street, a light was on in Victoria Sinclair's house. He thought about knocking. He thought, there's time. He went and made Lily's breakfast. The first snow of the season hit Willow Ridge on a Thursday in late November, the kind that arrives overnight without announcement and leaves everything looking temporarily forgivable. Mason was up before it got light, standing at the kitchen window with his coffee, watching the yard go from gray to white. The bird feeder was already busy. The cardinal had brought a partner somewhere in the past 2 weeks, and the 2 of them moved through the snow with the specific purposefulness of creatures that do not have the luxury of being surprised by weather. He'd developed a habit of watching the birds in the morning. He hadn't told anyone this because it was the kind of thing that sounds like more than it is when you say it out loud, but the truth was simple. It gave him something to look at that wasn't a list. The repair list was mostly complete now. The winter list, what needed doing before the cold settled in properly, was shorter and more manageable. Sandra Kim had the benefits application in a state she described as imminent resolution, which he'd learned to translate as 2 to 3 weeks. Lily was doing well at school, had 3 friends now including Harper, and had recently submitted a hand-drawn map of the solar system to a classroom bulletin board project that her teacher had emailed Mason about specifically because it was apparently unusually detailed. The house was warm. That was new. The insulation work in November had made a real difference. The hallway no longer bled heat overnight. The upstairs bathroom no longer required a specific mental preparation before stepping into it in the morning. Small improvements. Measurable ones. Mason understood measurable. What he was less certain how to measure was the space that had opened up in his chest somewhere between October and now. Not large, not dramatic. Just there. Like a room he'd been keeping locked that someone had quietly aired out. He knew what it was. He wasn't ready to say what it was. He heard Lily's feet on the stairs and turned from the window. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her owl pajamas, looked past him at the snow in the yard and said, "Oh, good," with the satisfaction of someone whose expectations have been met by the universe. "School's not canceled," he said. "I know, snow days are overrated anyway. You just sit inside." She went to the refrigerator. "Can we make actual breakfast?"
Not eggs. Something with more effort. It's 6:15. I'm awake, she said simply. He made pancakes. It took 35 minutes and was more complicated than eggs, and Lily ate 5 of them and called it the best morning of the week, which, given that it was Thursday, was not an overwhelming endorsement, but he took it. He drove her to school through the lightly covered streets of Willow Ridge, the truck's tires crunching through the inch of snow that the plows hadn't reached yet. Lily had her window down despite the cold, watching the neighborhood go past, cataloging it the way she cataloged everything. She'd been doing this since they arrived, building her mental inventory of Birchwood Lane, of Willow Ridge, of the particular geography of this life they were assembling. "Dad," she said as he turned onto the school road. "Yeah." "Do you like it here?" He thought about it honestly. "More than I expected," he said. "Because of the house?" "Partly." She considered this. "Because of Victoria?" He glanced at her. She was looking forward, her expression carefully neutral in that way that meant she'd already formed an opinion and was waiting to see if he'd confirm it. "She's a good neighbor," he said. "She's more than a neighbor," Lily said. "Neighbors don't spend their Saturdays fixing your house." "She likes the work." "She likes you," Lily said, with the flat certainty of someone reporting a geological fact. He pulled up to the school drop-off line. "Have a good day," he said. Lily grabbed her backpack. At the door, she turned back. "I'm just noting it," she said, which was what she always said when she was noting something she knew she shouldn't be noting, and got out. He watched her disappear through the school doors and sat in the drop-off line a moment longer than necessary. He drove home. The snow was still coming down lightly when he got back to Birchwood Lane. Victoria's car was in the driveway. She usually ran in the mornings, but not in snow, he'd learned. She had a limit about that. The light in her front room was on. He parked and got out and looked at her house for a moment, standing in the cold with snow landing on his jacket, and then went inside his own house because there was work to do. He was in the garage, going through his father's tools, a project he'd been putting off for 2 months because it required a level of deliberate attention he hadn't been ready for, when his phone rang. Not a number he recognized, area code he didn't know. He almost let it go to voicemail the way he did with unknown numbers. Something made him answer. "Mason Cole?" A man's voice. Easy and practiced, the kind of voice that had been consciously developed to sound certain of itself. "Who's this?" "My name is Callum Hart. I'm not sure if Victoria's mentioned me." Mason was quiet for a second. He set down the plane he'd been holding, his father's, good steel, the kind that lasts, and leaned against the workbench. "She hasn't," he said. A beat. "Well, I'm a friend of hers, an old friend. I'm going to be in Willow Ridge next week. I understand you two have gotten close." The phrasing was careful, too careful. "How did you get this number?" Mason asked. "Victoria's assistant, actually. I told her I was trying to coordinate a surprise visit. I hope that's not... I just wanted to get a sense of things before I arrived." A pause, perfectly timed. "She means a lot to me. I care about how she's doing." Mason looked at the plane in his hand, at his father's workbench, organized by a man who'd had 40 years to put everything in its right place. "I think if you want to know how Victoria is doing," Mason said, "you should call Victoria." Another pause. "Of course," Callum Hart said. "Absolutely. I'll do that. I wanted to reach out. Neighbor to neighbor, you could say." "I'm not your neighbor," Mason said. He ended the call. He stood in the garage for a while, not picking anything up, just standing. The snow outside had stopped. The garage smelled like his father's oil and sawdust, a smell that had become, over 3 months, something approaching comfort. He thought about the voice on the phone. Easy, practiced, slightly too smooth in the places where smooth shouldn't be effortless. He'd met men like that. In the army, you met all types and you learned fast which ones to watch. He picked up the plane again. He went back to the inventory. He didn't call Victoria. It wasn't his call to make. He thought about it all day. Victoria knocked on his door that evening, which was unusual. She typically came on weekends, and when she came on weekdays, it was with a specific practical reason. She had neither tool bag nor coffee. She was in her coat,
like she'd come over on impulse without giving herself time to prepare a reason. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, and stepped back. She came inside and stood in the hallway. She had the look of someone who had been sitting with something they were trying to decide how to carry. "Callum Hart called me today," she said. Mason nodded. "Did he call you?" she asked. He met her eyes. "This morning. In the garage." Something moved across her face. A tightening, quickly controlled. "What did he say?" "That he was coming to Willow Ridge next week. That he cared about how you were doing." He paused. "He got my number from your assistant. He said he wanted to coordinate a surprise visit." She closed her eyes for about 2 seconds. When she opened them, she looked tired in a way that was different from physical tiredness, the kind that comes from history with someone, from the accumulated weight of a relationship that ended and apparently did not stay ended. "I'm sorry," she said. "He shouldn't have called you." "You don't need to apologize to me." "I know. I'm apologizing anyway." She looked at the hallway floor, at the hardwood he'd refinished in October, which had come out well, better than he'd expected. "He's my former fiancé," she said. He'd known it was something like that from the tone of the phone call, but hearing it said changed the shape of the room slightly. "He's in Boston," she continued. "He's been in Boston for the past 3 years. He runs a private equity firm. We were together for 4 years before I moved here. When I told him I was leaving Boston, leaving that world, She stopped, adjusted. It wasn't a good ending. "They usually aren't," Mason said. She looked at him. "He says he's changed. He texted me last week. He wants to talk." "Do you want to talk to him?" She was quiet for a moment too long. "I don't know," she said. He nodded. He didn't fill the silence with reassurance because she hadn't asked for it, and she would know the difference. "He's coming regardless," she said. "He booked a room at the inn on Route 12. He told me this afternoon." A pause. "He's very good at deciding things and then making them sound like questions after the fact." "I noticed that," Mason said. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite the real smile. Something more complicated. "What is it you want?" he asked. She looked at him. "Not from him," he said. "In general, what do you want?" She stood in his hallway in her coat, and he could see her working through it. Not performing the working through, actually doing it, the real uncomfortable version where you stop giving yourself the prepared answers. "I want to not have this conversation," she said finally. "With him or with me?" "With anyone." She pulled her coat tighter, though the house was warm. "I've been fine here. Things have been—" She stopped again. He was learning her stops. This one meant she was rejecting the word she'd been about to use. "Good," she said, and the word came out slightly raw, like she'd had to strip something off it to get it to fit. "Things have been good here, and now he's coming, and I can already feel myself—" She pressed her lips together. "He has a way of making everything I've built here seem small. Like I'm hiding from the real version of my life." "Is that what you think you're doing?" Mason asked. "No," she said, firm. Then, "No, but when he talks—" She made a sound that was almost a laugh, humorless. "He's very convincing. He always was." Mason thought about what to say. He thought about several things and discarded them because they were either too much or not enough, or both. He thought about the woman who'd shown up at his house with coffee and the right-sized drill bit, and who'd spent her Saturdays pulling rotten fence posts, and who'd sat in his kitchen talking to his daughter about anglerfish, and he thought, this person knows what she's built. "You don't owe him a reconsidering," he said. She looked at him. "Whatever he's decided has changed," Mason said. "That's his accounting, not yours." He paused. "You're not the same person you were when you left Boston. Neither is what you've built here." She was quiet for a long moment, looking at him in the particular way she had sometimes, not searching exactly, more like verifying something she'd already suspected. "You're better at this than you think you are," she said quietly. He wasn't sure what to say to that, so he said, "Lily's upstairs. Stay for dinner if you want." She stayed. Callum Hart arrived on a Tuesday. Mason didn't see the arrival directly. He was at the Veterans Service Office with Sandra Kim, finalizing the last elements of the benefits paperwork, which Sandra handled with the brisk satisfaction of someone solving a problem that had annoyed her personally. He got home at 2 in the afternoon, and there was an unfamiliar rental car, dark gray, expensive model, Boston plates, parked in front of Victoria's house. He went inside. He did not stand at the window. He lasted about 20 minutes before he was in the kitchen making coffee that he didn't need and looking out the window at approximately the angle that included Victoria's front porch in the peripheral view. He saw them on the porch briefly, Victoria standing, arms crossed, and a man who was tall and put together in the way that people are when they've spent money on looking like it comes naturally. Callum Hart was probably Mason's age, maybe a year or two older, with the kind of face that photographed well, and probably knew it. They spoke for about 5 minutes on the porch, and then went inside. Mason drank his coffee. He went to the garage and worked on the last of his father's tools. The cataloging he'd been methodical about, setting aside what was still good, noting what needed sharpening or reconditioning, separating the irreplaceable from the merely old. It was precise work, and it kept his hands busy, which was the point. His phone buzzed at 4. Reeves. You good? Mason. Fine. Why? Reeves. You haven't texted in 2 weeks. Usually means either everything's great or something's happening. Mason. Things are fine. Reeves. How's the neighbor? Mason looked at the text for a moment. Mason. What neighbor? Reeves. The one you mentioned that one time and then never mentioned again, which means she's the only thing you think about. Mason put the phone face down on the workbench. He picked it back up. Mason. It's complicated. Reeves. Man, it's always complicated. That's not the same as bad. Mason. Her ex showed up. 3 dots. Then, then, do you need me to drive down? Mason. No. Reeves. Offer stands. Mason. I know. Thank you. He set the phone down again and went back to the tools. Lily noticed something was wrong at dinner. She had a calibrated sensor for Mason's moods that had been developed over 8 years of it being the two of them, and it was accurate in the way that instruments get accurate when they're the only one in the room. You're quiet, she said. I'm always quiet. Different quiet, she said. She had a bite of the chicken he'd made, actual chicken, not pasta. He'd been expanding the repertoire, and watched him. Is it the VA stuff? That's mostly sorted. Is it the house? House is fine. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is it Victoria? He looked at his plate. Dad? It's nothing, Lily. It's not nothing because you're doing the thing where you go somewhere inside your head and you stop being here. He looked at his daughter, 8 years old, sitting across the table from him in her school clothes with a smear of something on her collar, completely serious. He thought about Diane leaving and about the years of being the only constant in this kid's life. And he thought about how good she'd gotten at reading him because she'd had to, because there was no one else to tell her when he was struggling. That wasn't fair to her. It had never been fair to her. Victoria's ex-fiancé is in town, he said. Lily absorbed this. The not good one? She'd tell you about him? No, but she's mentioned an ex once, briefly. She looked at the table when she said it. He nodded. He should have known Lily would have registered that. Are you worried she'll go back to him? Lily asked. That's her decision, he said carefully. Lily ate a bite of chicken. That's not what I asked. He looked at his plate again. Outside, the November dark had settled over Birchwood Lane, and through the kitchen window he could see the lights on in Victoria's house. Same as always, steady and warm. Yeah, he said. I'm worried. Lily nodded once, like a confirmation of something. She went back to eating. She's not going to, Lily said. You don't know that. I know she fills up her car with gas every Sunday morning, Lily said. I know she has 2 mugs on her porch railing when she drinks coffee outside, even when she's alone, because she said she's always thinking about offering coffee. I know she remembers what I said about the anglerfish and asked me about it again 3 weeks later. People who are planning to leave don't remember small things. He looked at his daughter. You're 8, he said. Almost 9, she said. And I'm right. He didn't argue with her. He didn't sleep well that night. Not badly. Not the really bad nights he'd had in September. The ones where 4 o'clock found him in the kitchen with the lights off, running through lists of things that couldn't be solved by lists, just poorly. He lay in the dark, and the house made its settling sounds, and he thought about a man in a Boston-plated rental car, and about Victoria standing on her porch, with her arms crossed, which was the posture she used when she was protecting something. He thought about what he would have said if he'd been on that porch. Nothing useful, probably. He was not a man who was good at the kind of talking that Callum Hart was almost certainly very good at. He was not polished. He didn't have the easy, practiced voice. He knew how to do things with his hands, and how to keep people alive in terrible conditions, and how to be consistent when consistency was the only thing keeping structure in place. He didn't know if those were the things that counted for something here. He thought they should. He wasn't sure they did. Wednesday morning, Victoria came over at 7:30, earlier than usual. She had coffee, but it was clearly mechanical. She'd made it without thinking because the habit was the habit. She looked like she'd slept about as well as Mason had. "He wants me to come back to Boston," she said, sitting at the kitchen table. "He's presenting it as temporary, a trial. See if it feels different this time. He has a presentation, essentially." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "He's very thorough." "What does he want you to come back to?" Mason asked. "The life," she said. "The board position at his firm, the apartment in Back Bay, the version of me that existed before I came here." She paused. "He says I've been hiding." Mason sat down across from her. "He said the same thing to you," he said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him. "He uses the word hiding specifically because he knows it's the one that gets to me. He's always known which ones get to me." Her jaw set slightly. "That doesn't mean he's wrong. It means he's strategic." "Is he wrong?" "I keep asking myself that," she said. "And then I look at—" She stopped. "At what?" She looked at the kitchen table. The one his Aunt Carol had left, the scratches on the surface from 3 months of Lily's projects. The drawing, the schoolwork, the model solar system she'd been building in pieces. The ring from Mason's coffee cup that he kept meaning to address with a coaster and kept forgetting. The window above it with the tomato plant on the sill, still alive, improbably, making it through November on stubbornness and good light. "At this," she said quietly. "I look at this." He sat across from her, and the kitchen was warm, and the morning light came in at the angle it had been coming in since September, and he thought, "Say something." He thought, "This is when you say something." He had the words somewhere. He could feel them, the shape of them, what they were trying to be. He'd had them for weeks, longer than that. He said, "He flew in from Boston on a Tuesday." She looked at him. "He booked a room at the inn. He has a prepared presentation." Mason kept his voice even. "That's a lot of effort for something he's framing as casual." "It is," she said. "That's not me telling you what to do," he said. "I don't have a stake in this." She looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not hurt, not quite. More like a door being pushed on from the inside that didn't want to open from the outside either. "Okay," she said carefully. He hadn't meant it to land the way it landed. He heard it as it came out and knew it was wrong before she responded. Not wrong in content, wrong in what it left out. "I don't have a stake in this" was technically true in the most cowardly possible interpretation, and they both knew it. And he'd said it anyway because saying the true thing was harder, and he was, as it turned out, not as fixed as 3 months of house repairs might have suggested. She finished her coffee. She didn't stay long after that. When she left, he stood in the kitchen and looked at the coffee cup she'd left on the table and thought about all the times he'd told himself that consistency was enough, that showing up was enough, that being reliable in practical ways substituted adequately for being open in the ways that actually mattered. He thought about Lily saying, "You go somewhere inside your head and you stop being here." He thought about 14 years of being good at a job that required you to lock certain things in a box and focus on the operational reality, and about how that skill, genuinely valuable in an active combat zone, was considerably less functional in a kitchen in Tennessee. He didn't go after her. He didn't know what he'd say. He needed to know what he'd say before he went. The week was strange. Victoria was present. She didn't disappear. She wasn't avoiding him in any obvious way. But there was something changed, a slight recalibration of the space between them. Callum Hart's rental car appeared on the street on 3 different days. Mason saw them once from the garage, walking together toward the river path. Their body language, the particular composition of 2 people who share significant history and are in the middle of renegotiating its terms. He went back to the garage. He finished cataloging his father's tools. He sharpened the plane blades that needed it, cleaned the rust off the handsaw with navel jelly and fine steel wool. He put everything in its right place, which took 3 hours and was more satisfying than it had any right to be. Lily came home from school on Thursday and dropped her backpack on the kitchen floor, something she did not usually do, a precision kid who put things where they went, and stood in the kitchen doorway with an expression that was doing too much work to be casual. "What happened?" Mason asked. "Nothing," she said. "Lily." She sat down at the table. She put both hands flat on the surface. "Harper's brother said something," she said. He waited. "He said he saw Victoria and that man holding hands by the river." The kitchen was quiet. "James is 12, Lily said. "He could be wrong." "He could be," Mason said. "He's usually wrong about most things," she said. "Lily." "But he's also not usually mean," she said, her voice going tight in a way she was trying to control. "He didn't say it to be mean. He was just telling Harper, and I was there." Mason looked at his daughter, at the effort she was making to hold her face together, at the 8-year-old version of composure that was slightly too earnest to be convincing. "Come here," he said. She came around the table and he put his arm around her, and she let herself lean, which she didn't always. She was getting too old for it in her estimation, which was wrong. "Are you upset because of Victoria?" he asked. "I'm upset because of you," she said into his shoulder. He held on to that for a second. "I'm okay," he said. "You keep saying that." "I know." "It keeps not being true," she said. He didn't have an answer for that. He sat with her at the kitchen table in the afternoon light and didn't pretend he had an answer. That evening he went for a walk. He hadn't done this since arriving in Willow Ridge. Walked without purpose, without the specific intention of getting somewhere or doing something. He walked the river path east of town, the same path he'd seen Victoria run in the mornings. The November cold had real teeth in it now, frost on the ground covered by the path's edge, the river low and dark between the banks. He walked until the path curved north and the houses disappeared and it was just him and the river and the cold. He thought about the call from Callum Hart in the garage, that easy, practiced voice. He thought about what Victoria had said. "He has a way of making everything I've built here seem small." He thought about the 2 mugs on the porch railing, which Lily had told him about and which he'd thought about more than he wanted to admit. He thought about what he'd said. "I don't have a stake in this." That was the problem. That was what he'd been doing since September, building the wall at exactly the right height, the one that kept the cold out but also kept everything else at arm's length. He'd been good at the house, good at showing up on Saturday, good at fixing things, good at everything that didn't require him to say what he actually meant about what he'd found here. He stopped on the path. The river moved below him, dark and patient, doing what it had always done. He thought about his father knocking on a new neighbor's door with tomatoes from the garden. No agenda, Victoria had said. He just knocked. Mason turned around and walked back. He knocked on Victoria's door at 7:15. She answered in 20 seconds, which meant she hadn't been far from the door, which meant maybe she'd been expecting something. Maybe not him specifically, just something. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I need to correct something I said," he started. "Mason, I said I didn't have a stake in this," he said. "That was wrong. I do. I have a significant stake in it. I just..." He stopped. Started again. "I am not good at saying things like this. I'm better at being consistent, showing up, being reliable. Those feel like the same thing to me, but I understand they're not. And I think I've been using them as a substitute for actually, Mason." Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him. He looked at her. She was in the doorway with the warm light of the house behind her and the cold November air between them, and her face was doing the complicated thing it did when the real version of something was trying to get through the controlled version. "I know," she said. "I haven't said it yet," he said. "I know," she said again, softer. He looked at her. "Are you going back to Boston?" She was quiet for a moment that stretched. "I don't know," she said, honest, raw with it. Callum is very persuasive, and I'm not fully certain of myself right now, and I need to tell you that because you deserve the truth and not a version I've smoothed out." He nodded. He didn't like it. He nodded anyway. "What I do know," she said, "is that what's happened here is real. The work. The mornings. Your daughter telling me things she's decided are true about the world." She paused. "You. What I know about you." She pressed her lips together. "That is not nothing. I need you to know that." "I know that," he said. "Then stop saying you don't have a stake in it," she said, and it came out slightly uneven, which was the most unguarded he'd ever heard her. He wanted to say, "Don't go." 2 words, simple. He could hear them in his head with perfect clarity. He stood on her porch in the cold, with the distance between them being exactly 1 step, and he could not close it. Not yet. Not with Callum Hart's rental car 3 houses down, and her uncertainty still lived between them. He thought, "I will wait." He thought, "I will hold this." "Okay," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I'll see you Saturday," she said. "I'll be here," he said. He walked back across the street in the cold and went inside and stood in the kitchen in the dark for a while without turning on the lights. The bird feeder was invisible in the dark yard. He knew where it was. Saturday came. She knocked at 8. He opened the door. She had coffee. She had her tool bag. She had dirt already on one knee of her jeans from what he didn't know. She looked like she'd been awake for a while. "The south fence posts," she said. "2 of them shifted in the freeze." "I know," he said. "I was going to do it today." "Good," she said. "Let's do it." She came inside. He got his coat. They went out to the backyard in the cold Saturday morning and got to work, and the fence posts were stubborn in the frozen ground, and it took longer than it should have. And at one point, Victoria's impact driver stripped a screw and she said something under her breath that Mason chose not to repeat to Lily, who was watching from the porch in her coat with her hands in her pockets. It was not smooth. None of it was smooth. But the posts went back in straight and solid, and when they stamped the ground down around the bases, the earth held, and the fence ran true along the south side of the yard. Callum Hart's rental car left Willow Ridge on Sunday morning. Mason didn't know this until Lily told him at breakfast, with the precision of someone who had been monitoring the situation and felt it was relevant reporting. He looked at his coffee. "Okay," he said. "He's gone," Lily said. "I heard you." "I'm just noting it." He looked out the window. Across the street, the light in Victoria's house was on. The Sunday morning light, the one he'd come to know the same way he knew the angle of the morning light in his own kitchen. He finished his coffee. He got up. He got his coat. He did not bring anything. No tools, no reason, no practical justification. He walked across Birchwood Lane in the cold December morning and knocked on the door. She answered. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she stepped back from the door. He went inside. She made him coffee. That was the first thing. Not a conversation, not an explanation, just the practical motion of a person who needed something to do with her hands while she figured out where to begin. Mason sat at her kitchen table and looked at the room he'd been in a handful of times, but always briefly, always with a practical reason. Now, without one, he noticed things he hadn't before. The engineering drawings pinned to a corkboard on the wall beside the window. Real ones, working drawings, covered in handwritten notes in margins too small to read from here. The row of books on the shelf above the radiator. A mix of technical references and fiction, with cracked spines that meant they'd actually been read. A coffee mug on the counter that said Lisbon 2019 and had a faint chip on the rim that she clearly hadn't thrown it out over. A pair of running shoes by the back door, still damp at the laces from this morning. She set the coffee in front of him and sat across the table with her own, and didn't say anything immediately. The Sunday morning quiet of Willow Ridge came through the walls. A car passing, the distant sound of someone's dog, the particular stillness of a neighborhood that hasn't fully woken up yet. He asked me to come back, she said. I know. He made a good case, she said. That's the thing about Callum. He always makes a good case. He's very thorough and he knows which buttons to push She stopped, wrapped both hands around her mug. He said that what I have here is a phase, that I'm recovering from burnout and I've built a comfortable cocoon and that eventually I'll want the real thing again. Mason looked at her. What did you say? I said he was wrong, she paused, but I said it quietly, which is different from saying it like you mean it. Do you mean it? She looked at the table. Yes. Then, mostly, she looked up at him. The part that isn't sure isn't about Callum. It's not about Boston. It's about whether I trust my own judgment, because I made a lot of decisions in that life that I was completely certain about, and a significant number of them turned out to be wrong. So now when I feel certain about something, I also feel, she searched for it, suspicious of myself. He understood that more than she probably expected. What were you certain about? He asked. In that life. She considered it like she was taking inventory. That the company coming first was temporary, that the relationship could survive the company coming first indefinitely, that success in one area would eventually translate to, she made a small gesture, fill in the blank, that I didn't need things to be soft, that I was fine with how hard everything was because hard things are what I'm good at. She set the mug down. I was wrong about most of that. Which part were you wrong about? The part where I thought not needing softness was the same as not needing anything. She said it simply, without drama, which made it land harder than if she'd built up to it. Mason drank his coffee. Outside, a bird hit the window on the far wall. Just a glancing tap. Not bad, the kind that happens when the light is wrong. And they both looked up instinctively and then back at each other. Can I tell you something? He said. Yes. When Callum called me, in the garage, he turned the mug in his hands. My first instinct was to tell you immediately. My second instinct was not to because I thought it wasn't mine to manage, that you were a grown person who didn't need me inserting myself. That was the right instinct, she said. Maybe, but I spent the rest of that day in the garage trying not to think about it, which is what I do when something matters to me, and I don't know what to do with that. He paused. I did that a lot, with you. Found the practical thing to focus on because the practical thing I know how to handle. She was looking at him. I told you I didn't have a stake in this, he said, on your porch. I knew it was wrong when I said it. I said it anyway because the true thing was harder. What's the true thing? She asked. He looked at her across the kitchen table in the December morning, this woman who showed up with the right drill bit and stayed for anglerfish conversations and remembered what his daughter said 3 weeks later. This woman who had mud on her jeans in the grocery store and engineering drawings on her wall and a chipped coffee mug she'd kept for years. This woman who had sat in his father's kitchen, in the space his father had left, and made it feel inhabited again. That I have not felt like I was supposed to be somewhere, he said, in a very long time. And since September, I have felt that. He stopped. Here, that's the true thing. The kitchen was quiet. She held his gaze and he held hers, and neither of them moved for a moment. I sent Callum home, she said, Saturday night. I told him that what he's calling a phase is what I'm calling a life. That I'm not in recovery from anything. I'm just living differently than he expected. And that's not the same as being lost. She paused. He didn't take it well. Did you expect him to? No. But I needed to say it out loud to know I meant it fully. A pause. I mean it fully. He nodded. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. Mason? Yeah. I need you to understand something. She said it carefully, with the specific deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed how they want to say something and is now deciding whether the rehearsed version is the right one. I'm not a simple situation. The company requires a lot of me. There are months where I'm working 18 hours and I'm difficult to reach and I'm not good company. I travel, not constantly, but enough. I have a board of directors who are going to have opinions about my personal life that are intrusive and annoying and I cannot entirely prevent. She met his eyes. I'm not offering something uncomplicated. I did 14 years in the army with a kid, he said. I don't know what uncomplicated looks like. Something loosened in her face. I'm also not good at this, she said. The talking about it part. I default to logistics, to problem solving. I will absolutely try to fix something when what's needed is for me to just sit with it, and I will need to be told when I'm doing that because I don't always catch it myself. I'll tell you, Chet, he said. You're also not good at the talking part, she said. You close off. You go practical when something is personal. You've been doing it since September. I know. I'll tell you when you're doing that, she said. He looked at her. Okay. Okay, she said. They sat at the table with their coffee, and the December morning continued outside, and neither of them said anything for a while. It was not uncomfortable silence. It was the particular quality of quiet that happens after something real has been said, and both people are letting it settle rather than immediately burying it under more words. Then she said, Your daughter is going to be insufferable about this. He thought about Lily at the breakfast table yesterday morning, saying she's not going to with the flat certainty of someone who'd already done the analysis. He thought about, I'm just noting it. She already knows, he said. Victoria stared at him. Already. She figured it out in October, he said. Maybe earlier. Victoria pressed her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders were doing the thing they did when she was laughing and trying not to. She told me you like me, he said. She presented it as a geological observation. Victoria gave up on not laughing. It came out quiet and real, the same as in the hallway that day, and it was the best sound in the room. The weeks between that Sunday and Christmas were different. Not transformed, life doesn't transform. It adjusts by increments. But different in the way that a room is different when you move one piece of furniture to where it was always supposed to go. Things fit more naturally. The space between them stopped requiring management. She still came on Saturdays. She came on some evenings now too, and sometimes he went across the street, and sometimes it was because there was a practical reason, and sometimes it wasn't. Lily registered this development with the satisfaction of someone whose prediction has been borne out by data and who is gracious enough not to overstate it. She expressed this grace by only saying, I told you once, which for Lily was considerable restraint. Mason called Reeves on a Tuesday. So, Reeves said, after Mason had given him the short version. Yeah, Mason said. She's the one who figured out the compression fitting under the sink. She told me about it before it failed, technically. Even better, Reeves said. Is she good to Lily? Lily thinks she's basically a genius, Mason said. She wrote something about her in her composition book. What? I don't know. She doesn't show me the composition book. I only see it when she leaves it on the table. What did you see? Mason thought about it. He'd caught a glimpse 2 weeks ago, before Lily had appeared and reclaimed the book with the focused alarm of someone protecting classified materials. He'd only caught one line. He'd thought about it since. Victoria shows up and means it. Nothing specific, he said. Reeves was quiet for a moment. Man, I'm glad for you. Don't make it. I'm not making it anything. I'm just glad. A pause. Your dad would be glad. Mason looked at the kitchen window, the tomato plant on the sill, still improbably alive, the bird feeder in the yard, busy in the morning light. Yeah, he said. I think so too. The harder conversations came later because they always do. The easy things come first. The relief, the recognition, the warmth of finally saying what you meant. The harder things wait until the easy warmth has settled enough that you can tell it's real, and then they arrive because they always were going to. The first hard conversation happened on a Wednesday evening in mid-December. Mason had been at the kitchen table for 2 hours with his laptop, looking at job listings. Not casually, with the specific focused attention of someone who had identified a direction and was now doing the practical work of finding the entry point. He'd been thinking about it since October, more seriously since his conversation with Sandra Kim in November. Sandra, in the course of sorting out his benefits, had mentioned a transitional employment program run out of the Clarksville 5A office, connecting veterans in their first civilian year with mentorship roles at local organizations, some paid, some stipend. She'd mentioned it as information. He'd filed it and kept coming back to it. He'd also been reading about a program at Tennessee State that trained veteran to civilian transition counselors, a certification, not a degree. 6 months, mostly online, some weekend residencies in Nashville. Something you could do while doing other things. Victoria came over at 7. He had the laptop open. She looked at the screen. "What are you looking at?" she asked. He told her. She sat down. She looked at what he'd pulled up. The program website, the VA mentorship listings, a document from Sandra Kim he'd saved about civilian employment pathways. She read it carefully and thoroughly, the way she read everything. "This is good," she said. "It's a direction," he said. "I don't know if it's the right one." "What makes it feel right?" He thought about how to answer that. "I know what it's like to come home from somewhere and not know what the next thing is. I know what it's like to have the structure pulled out and not have anything to replace it with. I spent 3 months in between discharge and coming here in a state that I wouldn't recommend." He paused. "I know what helps, practically, and I know what doesn't." "You're good at practical," she said. "I know. I think this uses that." She looked at the screen. The certification program requires weekend residencies in Nashville, 6 of them over the course. That's 6 weekends where you're away. "I know." "Who has Lily?" He looked at her. She met his eyes without any particular expression, just asking, the way she asked everything. Direct, without agenda. "I'd have to figure that out," he said. "Aunt Carol, maybe. Or—" He stopped. "I can have her," Victoria said, "if that's what you're asking and not asking." "I wasn't— Mason." She said his name with a particular patience. "I'm offering. Not because I feel obligated, because I want to. Lily and I are fine on our own for a weekend. We've essentially had dinner together twice a week for 2 months." He looked at the table. He thought about what it would have meant to him 4 months ago to trust someone with his daughter's weekend. He thought about the 4 months of evidence, Saturdays and dinners and composition books and anglerfish, and tried to locate the fear that used to live in the place that evidence now occupied. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. "Apply to the program." "I haven't decided yet." "You have," she said. "You've been looking at this for weeks. You have that specific look." "What look?" "The one where you've already made the decision, but you're still doing research to see if the decision will talk you out of itself." She picked up her coffee. "It won't. You want to do this." He looked at the screen. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I want to do this." "Then do it." He submitted the application that evening. She stayed while he did it, working on her own laptop at the other end of the table, which had become a thing they did sometimes. Parallel work, different projects, the same table. It was domestic in a way that he hadn't had room for in 14 years, and which he was still calibrating carefully, because it mattered. The second hard conversation was his. It happened on a Saturday, late in December, cold enough that outdoor work wasn't practical, and they were inside instead. Victoria at the kitchen table with her engineering drawings, Mason sanding a section of the upstairs hallway baseboard that he'd been getting to for weeks. He'd brought the baseboard section downstairs because the hallway was too cold, and he was working at the table across from her with the hand sander and the smell of wood dust in the kitchen. At some point, the sanding stopped, and he was just sitting there with the baseboard in his hand, not doing anything. Victoria looked up. "What is it?" she said. He looked at the baseboard, at the grain of the wood under the old paint, which was better than the paint suggested. "Lily's mother called," he said. "Last week." Victoria put her pen down. "First time in about 8 months," he said. "She's coming through Tennessee in January. She wants to see Lily." The kitchen held the information. "What did you say?" Victoria asked. "That I'd ask Lily." He paused. "I haven't yet." "Why not?" He set the baseboard down on the table. "Because I don't know how to have that conversation without my feelings about it being all over it. And my feelings about it are—" He stopped, moved on. "Complicated." "What are your feelings about it?" He looked at the table. This was the part he was bad at, not identifying the feeling. He'd gotten better at that, but saying it out loud to another person without needing to immediately qualify or contextualize it into something more manageable. The Army had not encouraged this. His father had not modeled it. He'd gotten very good at internalizing things to the point where they became operational, which was a kind of conversion process that worked fine until it didn't. She left, he said. She made the decision she made, and she left, and Lily grew up the way Lily grew up. Well, mostly, she's Lily. But without a mother who was present, and I have watched my daughter navigate that her entire life, and he stopped. And I'm angry about it, he said. I've been angry about it for 8 years, and I don't show it because showing it to Lily would be the worst thing I could do for her, and so I have carried it around, and it is... He stopped again. Heavy, he said. It is very heavy. Victoria was very still across the table. And now she wants to see Lily, he said, and I have to be fair about this because it's not my call to make. It's Lily's, and Lily deserves to have a relationship with her mother if that's what she wants. And it doesn't matter what I feel about it. He looked up. But I feel it anyway. Of course you do, Victoria said. I'm not supposed to... Mason. Her voice was quiet and certain. You're a person. You're allowed to feel it. Feeling it doesn't mean you act on it or pass it to Lily. It just means it's there. She paused. It's always been there. You've been carrying it alone for 8 years. He didn't say anything. You don't have to do that here, she said. You don't have to carry it alone here. He looked at her. He was not good at accepting this kind of thing. The direct, unqualified offer of being held to account by another person. It required a degree of trust that he'd been so careful with for so long that the muscle had gotten stiff from disuse. Okay, he said. And then, because it was true, and he was trying to say true things. Thank you. Tell Lily, Victoria said. Give her the choice. You already know how to do that part. You've been giving her honest choices her whole life. This one's not different. He nodded. He picked up the baseboard again. He started sanding. After a moment, Victoria picked up her pen. They worked in the kitchen in the December quiet, and the hand sander made its small, steady sound, and outside the bird feeder was busy in the cold. He told Lily the next morning, Sunday, at the kitchen table over breakfast. He said it straight, the way he said things when he decided to say them. No preamble, no softening, just the fact, and then the space for her to respond. Diane had called. She was coming through Tennessee in January. She wanted to see Lily if Lily wanted to see her. Lily listened with both hands around her cereal bowl. The astronaut kind, which had become the default Sunday cereal, which he'd stopped monitoring for nutritional adequacy because some battles are not worth fighting. And her face did the thing it did when she was running a complex internal calculation. Do you want me to? She asked. It's not about what I want, he said. She gave him a look. Dad? I want what's right for you, he said. That's genuinely what I want. Not a version of what's right for me dressed up as what's right for you. She looked at her cereal. I think I want to see her, she said, but I'm scared. Of what? She worked on it. Of feeling like I want her to stay and she doesn't. A pause. She's done that before. Even when she was here, before she left. I think I remember, the feeling of her being about to go. Like the air changed. She looked up. I was 14 months old. I don't think I actually remember that, but I have the feeling of it. He looked at his daughter, at the patience she'd built around this particular wound, at the 8 years of accommodation that had gone into making room for something that was never going to be fully okay. You can see her, he said, and it doesn't have to mean anything beyond that visit. It doesn't have to mean a relationship. It doesn't have to mean forgiveness. It can just mean she came, you saw her, you got to look at her face and say whatever you want to say, and then she goes. Lily looked at him. Is that how you feel about it? He held her eyes. I'm working on it, he said. Honestly? She nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Tell her she can come. He texted Diane that afternoon. Lily said yes. Let me know the dates. He didn't add anything. He didn't need to. The certification program acceptance came in the first week of January, 2 days after the new year. Mason read the email 3 times standing in the garage in his coat because he'd gone out to get something and his phone had buzzed. He stood in the cold garage among his father's tools and read it 3 times and then went inside. Lily was at the kitchen table with Harper, the two of them doing some kind of project involving index cards, and what appeared to be an elaborate classification system. He showed Lily the email. She read it once. "Told you," she said, and went back to the index cards. Harper, who had become accustomed to the Cole household's particular communication style, looked at Mason. "Is that good?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "That's good." He texted Victoria. "Got in." She responded in under a minute. "Of course you did. Dinner tonight. I'm cooking." Mason. "You don't have to." Victoria. "I know. I want to. Come at 7. Bring Lily." He looked at the text. He put his phone in his pocket. He stood in the kitchen of his father's house, in the house they had rebuilt together through the fall, with the hardwood floor refinished and the porch railing solid and the insulation holding against the January cold, and the tomato plant on the windowsill that had made it through November and December on stubbornness, and had developed, improbably, a new shoot in the past week. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the room and thought about what it had looked like in September. The smell of old wood and losing air freshener, the jackets on the hooks, the absence everywhere. It felt inhabited now. It felt like something that was his. He went to tell Lily about dinner. She already knew. Victoria had texted her separately, apparently, which Mason only discovered because Lily was already putting on her shoes. "She asked me if I wanted to help cook," Lily said. I said yes. "You can't really cook," Mason said. "She's going to teach me," Lily said. "She's making her grandmother's sauce. It takes 3 hours and requires patient stirring, and she says it's the best thing she knows how to make." He looked at her. "When did she tell you about her grandmother's sauce?" "Tuesday," Lily said. "When you were at the VA office, I went over to borrow a ruler." "You have a ruler." "I wanted to visit," Lily said. "The ruler was an excuse." She looked at him with calm directness. "I like her, Dad. She's going to be important to us. I wanted to get to know her properly." He looked at his daughter in her coat with her shoes on, and her matter-of-fact certainty. "Okay," he said. "You should get your coat," she said. "We don't want to be late." He got his coat. The sauce did take 3 hours. Lily was given the stirring job and took it with extraordinary seriousness, standing at Victoria's stove with a wooden spoon and a focus that Victoria periodically checked and approved. Mason sat at Victoria's kitchen table and did exactly nothing useful, which Victoria had made clear was the plan when she told him to sit down and stop looking for tasks. "You're not working tonight," she said. "You're just here." He sat. He was not naturally good at just being somewhere. He was learning. He watched his daughter stir sauce and ask Victoria questions about her grandmother, a woman who had lived in Connecticut and had an enormous garden and had insisted, apparently, that the way you showed love for people was through feeding them, and that shortcuts in cooking were a form of insincerity. Lily had filed this as a truth worth knowing. She'd probably write it in the composition book later. Victoria caught his eyes over Lily's head. The look between them was brief and real and required no translation. The sauce was the best thing Mason had eaten in years. He said so. Victoria said it was the butter. There was more butter than anyone expected. And Lily said she'd been responsible for significant stirring and her contribution should be acknowledged, which they both acknowledged formally while she accepted the acknowledgement with dignity. They stayed until 9. Lily fell asleep on Victoria's couch at 8:30, which was not unusual when she crashed after a focused evening, and Mason carried her across the street and into her bed with the ease of having done it 100 times, and she stirred once and said something he didn't understand and went back under. He stood in the doorway of her room for a moment in the dark. He looked at the bookshelves she'd organized by her system that made sense only to her, at the astronaut patch jacket on the hook behind the door, at the composition book on her nightstand closed. He thought, "We're okay here. Not resolved. Not finished. Not arrived at some complete thing." January still had Diane's visit in it, and the first program residency in Nashville in February, and the question of the raised beds and whether the tomato seeds would take when he finally planted them, and 100 small negotiations between two people who were not naturally good at the talking part but were trying, and an 8-year-old who was going to be 9 in March, and who was already too smart for most of the things he'd try to protect her from. But here, in the doorway of his daughter's room, in his father's house on Birchwood Lane, with the smell of 3-hour sauce still on his jacket and the light from across the street visible through the window, Victoria's light, steady and warm as always. Mason Cole felt what he had not felt at the start of September when he'd stood in the front yard looking at a broken step and a yard full of weeds and a life that didn't fit yet. He felt like he was supposed to be here. He pulled Lily's door halfway closed, the way she liked it, and went downstairs and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table where all of it had happened. The bad mornings and the good ones, the plumbing emergencies and the certification applications, and the Saturday breakfasts and the long evenings with two people at either end trying to say what they actually meant. And he sat there in the quiet of his house and did not need it to be more than it was. It was enough. It was actually quite a lot. He drank his coffee. He looked at the tomato plant on the windowsill. The new shoot was visible even in the kitchen light, small and definitively green, pointing up with the blind optimism of things that are only just beginning. He thought about seed packets. He thought about spring. He thought about the raised beds along the south fence, turned and composted and ready for something to be put in them. He thought about knocking on a door across the street. He thought, tomorrow. He thought, there's time. He finished his coffee and washed the cup and turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. For the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, he slept well. Diane arrived on a Saturday in late January, which was not a day Mason would have chosen if he'd been given a choice, because Saturdays had become something else entirely on Birchwood Lane, and having them interrupted felt like a minor violation of an order he hadn't known he was attached to until it was disrupted. But Diane had a connecting flight through Nashville and a window of 4 hours, and 4 hours was what there was, so Saturday it was. He cleaned the house Thursday and Friday, not because it was dirty. The house had stopped being dirty sometime in November when he'd finally gotten ahead of the chaos enough to maintain rather than recover, but because he needed something to do with the tension that had been living in his chest since he'd sent that text in December. He cleaned the baseboards he'd already cleaned. He reorganized the pantry. He stood in the kitchen at 11 o'clock Friday night refolding dish towels, which was when he understood he needed to stop and go to bed. He told Lily Friday morning that Diane was coming the next day. Lily said, okay, and went back to her cereal. You okay? He asked. Not yet, she said. I will be. He looked at her. She was 9 now. Her birthday had been in March, a small party with Harper and 2 other girls from school, a cake that Victoria had made from scratch, and which had leaned noticeably to one side, and which Lily had declared perfect for exactly that reason. 9 years old and already in possession of a self-knowledge that most adults spent decades working toward. Me neither, he said. I will be too. She looked at him. Are you going to be here the whole time? The whole time, he said. She nodded. Okay. Victoria had offered, without being asked, to be available but invisible. Her words, delivered on a Thursday evening with the characteristic precision of someone who had thought about what was needed and identified it correctly. She said she'd be home, she'd have her phone, she would not insert herself unless called, but she wanted him to know she was there. He'd thanked her, and she'd said, don't thank me. And he'd said, I'm going to anyway, and she'd made the sound she made when she was letting something go rather than arguing it. Diane pulled up at noon in a rental car that was smaller and more practical than Callum Hart's had been, which Mason noticed and said nothing about. She was 34 now. He hadn't seen her in 2 years, and before that had only seen her a handful of times in the years since Lily was born. Handoffs once, for a week, when he'd been stateside on leave, and Diane had come through and asked to spend time with Lily, which he'd allowed. She looked like the person he remembered, close enough. A little older. Something slightly different in the way she held herself, but less defended, maybe. He wasn't certain enough of his own objectivity to trust that observation. She stood on the front walk and looked at the house. He watched her do it from the porch. It looks good, she said. It needed work, he said. It looks like it got it. He nodded. You want to come inside? Lily was in the living room. She'd been in the living room for 40 minutes doing nothing that he could identify, just sitting on the couch with her composition book, not writing in it, just holding it. When Diane came through the front door, Lily stood up and the two of them looked at each other across the room. Mason stood in the doorway between the hall and the living room and watched his daughter look at her mother, and he kept every single thing he felt about that moment on the inside where it belonged. "Hi, Lily," Diane said. "Hi," Lily said. There was a pause that was about 4 seconds and felt like longer. "You're tall," Diane said. "I grew 3 inches since second grade," Lily said. That's really great." Lily looked at her mother for another moment. Then she said, "I have a composition book. Do you want to see what I've been working on?" Diane said yes. She sat on the couch next to Lily, and Lily opened the composition book and began to explain. And Mason went to the kitchen to make coffee because he needed to be in a different room. He stood at the kitchen counter listening to the low murmur of voices from the living room. Lily's precise explanations, Diane's responses, the occasional question and answer. He made coffee he didn't want. He drank it standing at the counter. He looked out the back window at the yard he'd spent the fall rebuilding, at the raised beds with their cedar frames, at the bird feeder now reliably visited every morning, at the shed site that was now just clear flat ground waiting for something better. His phone buzzed. "Victoria, how's it going?" He typed back, "In the kitchen. They're talking." Victoria, "That's good. That's really good." Mason, "I know." Victoria, "You okay?" He thought about it honestly. Mason, "Working on it." Victoria, "I'm here." He put the phone in his pocket and went back to the doorway. Lily was showing Diane a page in the composition book. He couldn't see which one. Diane was leaning in to look at it with an expression that was carefully attentive in the way of someone who was very aware of the importance of getting this right and was trying hard and not entirely sure if trying hard was enough. It probably wasn't, all by itself. But it was something. He held on to that. The 4 hours moved the way difficult time does, both slowly and faster than expected, the two states operating simultaneously in a way that shouldn't be physically possible and consistently is. They had lunch. Mason made sandwiches, functional, nothing performative, and Lily showed Diane her room, and Mason heard his daughter's voice from upstairs explaining the book organization system with the thoroughness she brought to all explanations of systems she'd designed herself. And he heard Diane asking questions that were genuine questions, not conversation-filling ones. And he stood at the bottom of the stairs and let himself think. Okay. Before Diane left, she stood with Mason in the front hallway while Lily was upstairs getting a drawing she'd decided to give her. Something she'd made. A map of the solar system with all the planets labeled in her particular precise handwriting, with a small note in the corner that Mason hadn't seen and didn't read over Diane's shoulder when she looked at it. Diane folded the drawing carefully. "She's incredible," she said. Her voice was slightly uneven. "You've done something really right." "She did most of it," he said. Diane looked at him. "You know what I mean." He did know. He didn't say so. "I want to do better," Diane said. I know that's not a thing I can say and have it fix what I've done. I just want you to know I mean it." He looked at her. He thought about 8 years and a 3-paragraph note and a weight he'd been carrying in increments for so long he'd stopped noticing the individual pieces. "That's between you and Lily," he said. "Not me. If she wants a relationship with you, I will not stand in it. I promise you that." A pause. "But that's her decision. Not mine to make for her and not yours to take." Diane nodded. Her eyes were wet. She didn't let it go further than that, which he respected in her. "The house looks good," she said again at the door. "Yeah," he said. "It's getting there." She left. Lily stood on the porch and watched the rental car go, and then came inside and went to her room and closed the door. Not slammed, closed, which was different. He gave her 20 minutes, then he knocked. "Yeah," she said. He opened the door. She was on her bed with the composition book open, actually writing now. She looked up. "You okay?" he asked. She considered it. "It was sad," she said. "She's sad. Could feel it." "Yeah. I don't want to be sad about it forever," she said. "I want to feel it and then put it somewhere and not have it be the main thing." "That's a very mature way to approach it," he said. "Victoria said something like that," Lily said, "about her company, about how things that are hard don't have to be the main thing. You do the work and then you don't let it be the only thing you carry." She looked at her composition book. I wrote it down. He sat on the edge of her bed. Outside, the winter afternoon was going gray and cold, and the bird feeder was getting its evening visitors. How do you feel? He asked. She thought about it. Like I needed to see her, she said. Like now I know what I was wondering about, and I can stop wondering. A pause. And sad. Still sad, but cleaner sad. Does that make sense? He thought about the specific weight of unresolved things, and how different it was from the weight of things you'd faced and named and put somewhere deliberate. Yeah, he said, that makes sense. She went back to writing. He sat there a while longer, not saying anything, just being in the room, which was sometimes the only thing needed, and the hardest thing to know you were doing right. February arrived with the first program residency in Nashville. Mason drove up on a Friday afternoon and came back Sunday evening, and in his absence, Lily stayed with Victoria, which had been arranged with the logistics clarity that both of them brought to practical things, and the emotional ease that came from having been building toward it all fall. Victoria picked Lily up from school Friday, fed her dinner, let her stay up until 9:30 on the condition that the extra 30 minutes was used for reading and not screen time, which Lily negotiated down to 45 minutes and got, and they spent Saturday doing what Lily later described as a lot of good things. The good things, as Mason extracted them over the following week in pieces, because Lily released information on her own timeline. They'd gone to the garden center on Oak Street and bought seed packets. Tomatoes, heirloom variety, the kind Mason had been meaning to buy since September. They'd made pasta together, Victoria's grandmother's recipe adjusted for a 9-year-old sous chef. They'd watched a documentary about deep-sea creatures that Lily had been lobbying for, and which Victoria had apparently genuinely found interesting, because she'd asked questions throughout and written down 2 things on a notepad, which Lily had recorded as a significant mark of intellectual engagement. They'd also, apparently, had a conversation that Lily did not report in full. She reported only the edges of it, that Victoria had talked about her own father, who had died when she was in college, and whom she missed in a way she said didn't get smaller, just more familiar. That Lily had talked about Mason's father, whom she'd never known but whose jackets were still on the hooks in the front hall, because they'd decided to keep them, and it would be weird if there were empty hooks. That they'd both agreed that people leave things behind in houses and in people, and that's not the same as being gone. Mason heard this from Lily on a Wednesday evening and sat with it for a while after she went to bed. He texted Victoria. Lily told me about the conversation, about your dad. Victoria, after a few minutes, she told you? Mason, the edges of it. Victoria, she's not 8 anymore. She asks real questions. Mason, I know. She always did. Victoria, she asked me if I thought you were going to be okay, long term. He looked at his phone. Mason, what did you say? Victoria, I said yes. I said I was going to make sure of it. He sat at the kitchen table in the house on Birchwood Lane and read that text 3 times, which was about twice more than necessary, and then he put the phone down and looked at the kitchen and thought about what it meant to have someone decide that about you. Not promise, not hope. Make sure of it. The specificity of that. The intention in it. He picked the phone back up. Mason, thank you. Victoria, stop thanking me. Mason, no. A pause. Victoria, fine. You're welcome. The program in Nashville was harder than he'd expected and better than he'd feared. The first residency covered foundations, assessment methodology, transition stress, crisis recognition. The other participants were mostly veterans themselves, which meant the communication in the room was direct and low, on performance, and high on the kind of dark humor that people use to stay functional around heavy material. He liked them immediately, which surprised him in the way that being reminded you're capable of liking people sometimes does. The instructor was a woman named Dr. Patricia Ewan, 60, former Navy psychiatrist, who had the manner of someone who had heard every possible human story and still found each new one interesting. She ran the sessions with an economy of language that Mason respected and a precision of insight that occasionally caught him off guard. On the second day, she said something that he wrote down on the notepad he'd brought, which he'd filled half of in 2 days, which was more note-taking than he'd done since he couldn't remember. The most useful thing you can be for someone in transition is a person who has been through it and didn't pretend it wasn't hard.
Not a success story, not a cautionary tale, just a person who made it through and can say so honestly. He looked at that for a long time. He thought about September, about standing in the front yard with a broken step and a list that kept growing, about the first night in the house, Lily in his bed at midnight because new houses were loud, about the compression fitting under the sink and a neighbor who already knew what kind it was.
He thought, I have something to offer here. Not because he'd arrived somewhere finished, because he hadn't and was still going, and that was the thing. He drove home Sunday evening with the windows down despite the February cold, the Nashville lights behind him, and the particular dark of rural Tennessee opening up ahead, and he called Reeves on the hands-free. How was it? Reeves said. Good, Mason said. Really good. A pause. Reeves was a careful listener. He'd always been. You sound different. Yeah? Less compressed, Reeves said. You used to sound like someone who'd vacuum-sealed everything. You sound like you let some air back in. Mason thought about that. Victoria says I go practical when things are personal. She's right. I know. You're not doing it right now, Reeves said. No, Mason said. I'm not. He could hear Reeves smiling through the phone. Good. Come visit sometime. The boys want to meet you. I'll come in the spring, Mason said. Bring Lily. Obviously. Bring Victoria, Reeves said, and hung up before Mason could respond, which was a thing Reeves did when he wanted the last word and knew he had it. Mason drove through the February dark with the radio off and the windows down and thought, spring. March came in uneven. Warm one week, cold snap the next. The Tennessee weather doing what Tennessee weather does, which is to say, whatever it wants. The tomato seedlings were on the kitchen windowsill now, in small peat pots that Lily had labeled in her precise handwriting, Mortgage Lifter, Cherokee Purple, Brandywine. She'd researched the varieties herself after she and Victoria had bought the seeds, and had presented her findings to Mason in a document that was 3 pages long and included a comparison chart of days to maturity and optimal soil pH. He'd looked at the document and then at his 9-year-old and said, Where did this come from? Victoria helped me with the format, Lily said. The content is mine. The content is extremely thorough. The tomatoes deserve thorough, she said. He put the document on the refrigerator with a magnet. The seedlings were doing well. He checked them every morning, an addition to the bird feeder observation, which remained a consistent part of the day's opening. The cardinal pair were regulars now. There were also a pair of chickadees who had established themselves as aggressive and territorial in ways that seemed disproportionate to their size, and which Lily found deeply relatable. Victoria came over most evenings now. Sometimes she brought work and sat at the kitchen table while Mason cooked, or she cooked. She'd gotten possessive about certain dishes, and he'd learned to stay out of the way. And Lily moved through the kitchen on her own business, the 3 of them occupying the space with the ease of people who have learned each other's patterns and stopped needing to announce their presence. It was ordinary. It was the most valuable kind of ordinary, the kind you have to build from scratch because it doesn't arrive ready-made, the kind where you know the exact weight of what you'd lose if you lost it. One evening in late March, Victoria was on the phone, the board call she got every other Wednesday, which she took in the kitchen or on the porch, depending on the weather, pacing slightly, her voice going into the particular register it used for the professional world, clipped and certain. Mason was helping Lily with a school project at the kitchen table, a model of the water cycle that involved a lot of plastic wrap and a bag of cotton balls and a small lamp they'd borrowed from the bedroom. Lily looked up from the cotton cloud she was assembling. She watched Victoria on the phone through the kitchen window. She's good at that, Lily said. At the board calls, Mason said. At being 2 things at once, Lily said. She's the company person, and also, she gestured at the kitchen generally. This person, she doesn't lose one when she's being the other. He looked at Victoria through the window, pacing the porch in her flannel with the cold March evening around her, talking to her board of directors about something she'd later summarize for him in 2 sentences and a hand gesture, already present in both places at once. No, he said, she doesn't. I want to be like that, Lily said. When I'm grown, I want to be all of who I am at the same time. He looked at his daughter,
at her cotton cloud in her 9-year-old hands and the composition book always within reach. "You already are," he said. She considered this, accepted it, went back to the clouds. April. The seedlings went into the raised beds on the first Saturday of April, which was warm enough to justify it if you were optimistic about the forecast, and Mason was feeling, for the first time in a long time, genuinely optimistic about forecasts.
They all did it together, all three of them, in the backyard on a Saturday morning, with the April light coming in low and bright over the south fence. Victoria had her gardening gloves, the ones she'd had since October, and which were seasoned now with months of the yard's particular soil. Lily had a smaller pair he'd bought her for Christmas, green rubber ones she wore with great seriousness. Mason dug the holes to depth with the transplanting trowel while Lily carried the seedlings from the porch with the focused care of someone transporting something irreplaceable, and Victoria followed behind, firming the soil around each plant with the practiced hands of a person who'd done this before and knew what the work felt like. They put in 12 plants. It took about an hour. When they were done, they stood at the edge of the bed and looked at what they'd planted. Small, improbable green things in the turned-dark soil his father had once used for the same purpose. "They're going to need water," Lily said. "Every day," Victoria said. "Not too much, consistent." "I'll do it," Lily said. "Before school. I'll check them every morning." "I'll check them with you," Mason said. Lily looked at the plants, at the bed, at the fence, at the south edge of the yard with the light coming over it. "Grandpa grew these," she said. It was not quite a question. "From seed," Mason said. "Like we did." "Like we did." She crouched down and looked at one of the seedlings up close, at the small paired leaves on the stem. "Hi," she said quietly to the plant. Not silly, serious, the way she said most things. He looked at Victoria. Victoria was looking at Lily. The expression on her face was the kind that happens when something gets in through the defenses because the defenses weren't raised and you weren't expecting it. And it wasn't bad, it was just much. She caught him looking and didn't look away. He reached over and took her hand. She held it. They stood in the April yard with their daughter crouching in the turned soil, talking quietly to the tomato plants. And the birds worked the feeder on its almost straight post. And the house stood at the end of the yard with its fixed gutters and its solid porch railing and its warm windows. And it was not a perfect moment because perfect moments are a thing people describe in retrospect to make their past sound more deliberate than it was. It was just a Saturday morning in April with dirt on their knees and a lot of work behind them and more ahead. And it was enough. It was exactly enough. The porch was finished that same weekend, not newly built. The structure had been sound since September when his father built it. The bones good. The bones always good in this house. But finished in the sense of being completed. Mason had been putting off the last details since November. The section of floorboards on the northwest corner that had soft spots from years of water pooling in the low corner, which he'd kept meaning to address and kept moving down the list as other things took priority. He replaced them Saturday afternoon while Victoria worked on a presentation for a board meeting the following week, her laptop on the porch table, occasionally looking up to assess his progress with the particular critical eye she turned on structural work, regardless of whose it was. "You're going to miss the grain match on that third board," she said at one point. "I know," he said. "I don't have a perfect match. Close enough." "Rotate it," she said. 90 degrees. The grain runs different on the ends." He looked at the board, rotated it. It was better. "Thanks," he said. "You're getting good at taking direction," she said without looking up from her screen. "I was always good at taking direction," he said. "I just needed it to be correct direction." She made the sound she made when something struck her as true, and she didn't want to say so directly, which he'd learned to read as agreement. The boards went in. The floor was solid. He walked the porch end to end and back, and it held and didn't flex and didn't creak in the wrong place. And he stood at the northwest corner and looked out at Birchwood Lane in the April afternoon, at the oak tree with its new spring leaves, at the sidewalk with its familiar heaved slabs, at the house across the street with its clean paint and its morning coffee mugs, at the neighborhood that had existed before him and would exist after, and had, in the space of 7 months, stopped being a place he'd returned to and become a place he lived. "Done?" Victoria asked from the table. "Done," he said. She closed her laptop and looked at the floor. She walked to the northwest corner and stood where he was standing and looked at it. "Good work," she said. He looked at her. At the person standing on his porch, who had held the ladder and called the level by eye and helped him figure out what was wrong before it failed and sat at his kitchen table at two ends while they both did their separate work and called him by name in the particular way that still did something to the inside of his chest, 7 months in, which he had stopped trying to understand and simply acknowledged as a fact of his current existence. He said, "Can I ask you something?" She looked at him. She knew, he thought. He thought she probably knew, the way she generally knew things a half step ahead of when he said them. She said, "Ask it." He said, "I came back here in September not expecting anything. I expected to fix a house and figure out what came next. I had no plan past that. No vision. Just one task at a time." "I know," she said. "And then you knocked," he said. "Or I knocked. Both." "Both," she agreed. This is not." He stopped. He was doing the thing, the going practical, the finding the procedure when there wasn't one. He took a breath. He said the true thing. "I want you in this. Not as a neighbor who comes on Saturdays, not as someone who is important but separate. In this. In the..." He looked at the house, at the door, at the porch they were standing on. "In the life that's being built here. I want you to be in that." She looked at him for a long moment. The April afternoon moved around them. A car down the block, a bird from the yard, the sound of Lily inside, probably on her second reading of the day. "Mason," she said. "I know it's..." "Mason," she said again, and she said it the way she'd said it that night on his porch in November, direct and landing clean, which meant stop talking for 1 second. He stopped. She said, "I've been in it since October. You're the last one to notice." He looked at her. She raised an eyebrow, one side slightly higher, the real one. "I moved my work schedule around 3 Saturdays to be here. I have opinions about your tomato varieties. I know which board in the upstairs hallway creaks second from the top. I know Lily's book organization system and why the compromise between size and color makes structural sense, and I know you check the bird feeder before you check your phone every morning." She paused. "I'm in it. I've been in it." He said, "Then stay." She looked at him. "Not as a guest," he said. "Not as across the street. Stay." The afternoon light came across the porch boards he'd just finished, the ones that were close enough grained and solid under their feet, and Victoria Sinclair looked at Mason Cole on the porch they'd rebuilt from a state of serious structural concern, and she said, "Yes, just that. No performance, no qualification, no careful calibration. Just yes," said, like she'd already decided and had been waiting for the question to catch up. He put his arms around her and she let him, which was a thing that still surprised him sometimes. How easily she let him, this person who ran a billion-dollar company with controlled precision and held most of the world at a managed distance. And they stood on the porch in the April afternoon and the oak tree moved in the light breeze coming up from the river. And neither of them said anything for a while because nothing needed saying. The back door opened. Lily appeared on the porch steps, presumably on her way to check the tomato plants, and stopped when she saw them. She looked at them with the specific look of a 9-year-old who has been right about something for a long time. "Finally," she said. "Go check on the tomatoes," Mason said. "I'm just noting it," she said. Lily. She went to check the tomatoes. She did it with great dignity and absolutely no ability to conceal her satisfaction, which he chose not to point out. Victoria was doing the silent laugh thing, shoulders moving, face turned slightly. "She's been waiting since October," Victoria said. "She's been waiting since before October," Mason said. "She noted it before I knew there was anything to note." "She's going to be something," Victoria said. "She already is," he said. "Same as before." Still true. Summer came the way it does in Tennessee, loud and green and certain of itself, the heat arriving in June like something that had been planning this all along. The tomatoes grew. Lily checked them every morning before school and reported their progress at dinner with the statistical thoroughness of someone tracking an important experiment, noting height and new growth, and the first appearance of flowers with the same precision she'd brought to the book organization system and the solar system map and all the other things she cataloged because the world, in Lily's view, deserved to be paid close attention. Mason started working with the VA transitional program in Clarksville in May, part-time, while he finished the certification coursework. The work was exactly what he told Victoria it would be. Practical, grounded in what he knew from the inside. He sat across from men and women who looked like he had in September, that particular combination of capable and lost that military transition produced, and he told them the true things. Not the polished version, not the success narrative. Just, here is what it looked like, here is what helped, here is what I got wrong, here is the next thing. He was good at it. Not because he'd arrived somewhere finished, because he was still in it and said so, and that was the thing that actually reached people. Dr. Ewan, at the second residency in April, had pulled him aside after a session. "You have a particular quality," she said, in her direct way. "Which quality?" he said. "You tell the truth at the expense of sounding competent," she said. "Most people do the opposite, veterans especially. They've been trained to project capability even under adverse conditions, which is operationally useful and personally limiting." She looked at him. "You're not doing that. Keep not doing it." He thought about that drive. He thought about it often. Victoria restructured 2 of her overseas project meetings to morning slots in July, which moved them from overlap with Lily's school pickup, something Mason hadn't asked her to do, and which she mentioned only as a schedule note, not as a thing that deserved acknowledgement. He acknowledged it anyway. She said, "Stop." He didn't. The board, apparently, had thoughts about Willow Ridge. She told him this on a Thursday evening, in the way she told him work things, factually, without the protective edit she'd used in the early months. 2 board members had suggested that her presence in Tennessee was limiting her effectiveness, that she should consider relocating to be closer to the company's primary operations base in Atlanta. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "That my effectiveness metrics have improved consistently since I relocated here 4 years ago," she said. "And that my presence in a particular geography is my business unless it can be demonstrated to affect performance, which it cannot." A pause. "And that I wasn't moving." He looked at her. "Was that the right answer?" she asked, not like she doubted it, more like she was checking something. "Yeah," he said. "That was the right answer. Good," she said, and went back to her presentation. He watched her work for a moment, at the engineering drawings on her corkboard, at the Lisbon 2019 mug with the chipped rim, at the woman who had knocked on a new neighbor's door because his father had knocked on hers, and who was now sitting at the kitchen table in that neighbor's son's house while the tomatoes grew in the yard his father had planted, and a 9-year-old slept upstairs under a mobile of planets she'd made herself. He thought about his father bringing tomatoes across the street. No agenda. He just knocked. He thought about what it cost to do that and what it returned. The evening they brought in the first tomatoes was a Thursday in late July, warm and golden in the way of July evenings, and Lily did the harvest herself with the small scissors they'd bought specifically for it, carrying the tomatoes in a bowl with both hands like they were fragile things, which they weren't, but the impulse was right. She set the bowl on the kitchen table. 6 tomatoes, 2 Cherokee purples, 2 Brandywines, 2 mortgage lifters, red and dark and heavy with a summer's worth of daily checking. The 3 of them stood around the bowl. "Grandpa's tomatoes," Lily said. "Grandpa's seeds," Mason said. "Our tomatoes." Lily looked at him. Something in her face did a thing he didn't have a word for. Not quite sad, not quite glad. The particular complexity of something that is both at once, and you've stopped trying to separate them. "Okay," she said. "Our tomatoes." Victoria cut one of the Brandywines on the cutting board with a good knife, the way you cut something you respect, careful, deliberate, the kind of cut that doesn't waste anything. She sliced it into sections and put them on a plate and added a little salt and nothing else because the tomato at peak summer doesn't need anything else, and they each took a piece and ate it standing at the kitchen table in the July evening. It was good. It was genuinely, remarkably good. The kind of good that tastes like where it came from, the particular sweetness of a thing grown slowly in the right conditions. Mason ate his piece and thought about his father standing at the back window with his coffee, looking at the beds. Thought about September and broken steps and the smell of a house that had given up. Thought about the length of the list and how the list kept growing while you were making it, the way those lists do, and how you got through it anyway by doing the next thing and then the next thing after that. He thought he would have liked this. His father standing in this kitchen with these people eating this tomato. He would have stood at the edge of it and been quietly pleased without making a production of it, and he would have brought more tomatoes across the street to the neighbor who remembered his name, and he would have knocked. "It's good," Lily said about the tomato. "Really good," Victoria agreed. Mason looked at the bowl, at the kitchen, at the evening coming through the window, at the two of them standing at his table. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Later that summer, on the last Saturday of August, a year, nearly, from when the moving truck had turned the corner at the end of Birchwood Lane and disappeared, Mason and Victoria sat on the porch together in the evening. The porch they'd rebuilt from soft rotted wood and failed fasteners, and a Saturday in October that had turned into every Saturday after. The solid porch, with the close enough grain on the northwest boards and the new railing that didn't flex and the steps that were level and sound. Lily was at Harper's. The street was quiet. The heat of August had broken slightly, the first hint of September in the air, a temperature that knew what was coming without announcing it yet. They sat in the two chairs he'd bought in May, good ones that were meant for sitting in rather than folding for storage, and Victoria had her feet tucked under her the way she always did, and Mason had his coffee, the good kind, always the good kind now. The neighborhood moved around them in its evening way, someone's screen door, a car, kids somewhere down the block, voices carrying, the cardinal in the oak tree singing the song it sang at the same time every evening, which Lily had identified as territorial and beautiful simultaneously, which she'd said was not a contradiction. Mason looked at Birchwood Lane, at the sidewalk slabs still uneven from 30 winters of heave and settle, at the Henderson flag, at the Cartwright lot, still empty. He'd been thinking about that lot. What could go there, which was the kind of thinking he did now, forward thinking, spring thinking, the thinking of someone who believes in next year. He looked at the house across the street, dark now, because Victoria was here. He thought about the man who had come home feeling like the wrong shape for the life waiting for him. He thought about how badly he'd been wrong about that, not because the life was easy or finished or without the difficult things that were still coming. Diane's complicated ongoing presence at the edges, the residency months that required logistics and trust, the board members with their opinions, the bad nights that still arrived occasionally because certain things don't cure, they manage, but because the life had turned out to be not the wrong shape. The life had turned out to be a thing you build, not a thing you find. And building it, as it turned out, was something he was capable of. He was not a finished person. He was not even particularly smooth around the edges. He still went quiet when things got difficult, and went practical when things got personal, and had to be reminded to say the true thing instead of the easier one. He was still learning how to be in one place, how to be present in the full sense of the word, how to let his daughter see him struggle without turning the struggle into a performance of competence. He was still, frankly, figuring out most of it. But he was here. He was entirely here. And that, it turned out, was not a small thing. Victoria reached over and took the coffee out of his hand, drank from it without asking, and gave it back. He looked at her. "It's my coffee," he said. "I know," she said. He looked back at the street. After a moment, he said, "I'm glad I came back." She was quiet for a beat. "To Willow Ridge?" "To this," he said. "All of it. The house, the mess of it, the list that kept getting longer." He looked at her. "You." She held his gaze. In the evening light, her face was the version of itself that only existed when she'd stopped managing what it showed. Open, real, with the particular quality of a person who has been careful for a long time and is slowly learning that it's safe not to be. "I'm glad you came back too," she said, simply, meaning it fully. The street was quiet. The tomatoes were still on the vine, the last of the season, the ones they'd let go a little longer because there was no rush now. The bird feeder was full. The raised beds were full. The house behind them was warm and inhabited and full of the evidence of people who lived there. Lily's drawing on the refrigerator, The composition books on the shelf, the astronaut patch jacket on the hook by the door, the engineering drawings pinned to the corkboard in the kitchen, the mismatched coffee mugs, the tomato plant on the windowsill that had made it through winter and spring and summer and was still, improbably, growing. Full. That was the word for it. Mason Cole sat on the porch he'd rebuilt, in the house his father had left him, in the town he'd come back to not expecting anything, and the evening moved around him, ordinary, quiet, alive. And he thought, this is it. This is what it was always supposed to feel like. Not perfect, not resolved into something clean, just real and chosen, and his. He reached over and took Victoria's hand the same way he had in April in the yard with the tomato plants between them, and she held it the same way she had then, and the light went down slow over Birchwood Lane, and neither of them moved to go inside for a long time. There was no rush. They were home,